The vultures circled overhead, black specks against the merciless Arizona sky. Samuel Hayes tracked their lazy spirals with narrowed eyes, his weathered hand shading against the blinding sun. Death had a scent that carried for miles in the desert, and these patient scavengers rarely made mistakes. Adjusting his worn cavalry hat, Samuel squinted through the heat waves rippling across the valley. His once military posture had softened with the years, but at 45, his hands remained steady as he lifted his Winchester rifle to scan the horizon. 3 years of solitude had honed his senses to detect even the slightest disturbance in this harsh landscape. The summer of 1878 had baked the earth hard as iron. 3 months without rain had transformed streams to dusty scars across the land. Samuel's small homestead survived only because of the natural spring bubbling behind his cabin, an unexpected blessing that had made this seemingly worthless land his sanctuary. The vultures dipped lower, focusing their attention on a ravine below. Samuel guided his chestnut mare down the rocky slope, curiosity overcoming caution. The sharp crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. His mare reared as dirt exploded near its hooves. Battlefield instinct took over. Samuel dismounted in one fluid motion, slapping the horse's flank to send it scrambling for cover while he rolled behind a boulder. The Winchester was already braced against his shoulder, his breathing measured as he'd been trained. A second shot struck the rock above, sending stone shards raining down on his hat. There, a metallic glint on the far ridgeline. Samuel squeezed the trigger once. The Winchester's report echoed through the canyon walls. A distant cry confirmed his aim remained true. When no further shots came, Samuel emerged cautiously. Movement caught his eye down in the ravine, not where the shooter had been, but in the canyon floor itself. A small group of figures surrounded what appeared to be a mound in the earth. Using scattered boulders for cover, Samuel worked closer. The distinctive patterns of Apache clothing came into view. 3 warriors, a medicine man with an elaborate headdress of raven feathers, and 2 women. They stood around. Samuel's breath caught. Not a mound. A human head protruding from the earth. A woman buried to her neck in the hard-packed dirt, her long black hair hanging in matted strands around a face baked red by the relentless sun. Her eyes were closed, but the slight movement of her chest revealed she still lived. The medicine man, face painted with symbols Samuel didn't recognize, placed a wooden sign around her neck carved with Apache symbols. He spoke in a low, guttural voice, his hands making ritual gestures over the woman's head. The others responded with affirmations before mounting their horses and riding away, leaving her to die under the desert sun. Samuel waited until they disappeared before approaching. Up close, her condition was worse than he'd feared. Her lips were cracked and bleeding skin blistered from exposure. When he knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open, dark almond-shaped and filled with a fierce determination that struck him like a physical blow. "I'll get you out," Samuel said, pulling his hunting knife and beginning to dig around her neck and shoulders. The whistle of an arrow cutting through air gave barely a second's warning. Samuel threw himself sideways as it thudded into the dirt. 3 Apache warriors appeared on the ridge, not the same group as before, but clearly with the same purpose. Samuel drew his Colt in one fluid motion, aimed and fired. The lead warrior clutched his chest and toppled from his horse. The others disappeared behind the ridgeline, but arrows continued to rain down, forcing Samuel to work in frantic bursts between taking cover. He dug desperately, the knife becoming an extension of his will, as he carved away the packed soil around the woman's body. Her shoulders emerged, then her chest wrapped in a deerskin dress, once decorated with intricate beadwork, but now filthy and torn. Almost there. Samuel grunted, prying at the compacted soil around her waist. When he finally freed her, she weighed almost nothing in his arms, skin, bone, and determination. She couldn't stand her legs numb from constriction. Samuel whistled for his mare, lifted the woman onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. The warriors appeared again, closing in. Samuel fired twice more, forcing them back, then spurred his horse forward. They raced across the valley floor, hooves kicking up dust, as they headed for the sanctuary of his cabin in the foothills. "Hold on," he told the woman, feeling her slump against his chest. "Just hold on." Samuel's cabin stood alone at the edge of a small mesa backed by ponderosa pines and facing the open desert. The strategic positioning offered clear views of any approach, a habit formed during war years that had kept him alive. A small corral held 2 additional horses and a mule. Behind the cabin, a garden of vegetables and herbs caught the day's last light, nourished by the spring that made this parcel valuable beyond its appearance. By the time they arrived, the woman had lost consciousness. Samuel carried her inside and laid her on his bed. The cabin's interior was Spartan but orderly. A stone fireplace, a roughly made table with chairs, shelves holding provisions, books, and ammunition. In one corner sat a locked trunk that Samuel carefully avoided looking at as he moved around the small space. He soaked a cloth in cool water and placed it on the woman's forehead. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Dried blood crusted around her neck, where the wooden sign had chafed her skin raw. He removed it carefully and placed it on the table. As he tended her, Samuel's eyes occasionally drifted to a framed photograph on the shelf. A pretty woman with gentle eyes holding a young girl with matching dimples. Eleanor and Lily, his wife and daughter, lost to influenza in '75. The reason he'd fled Tennessee and headed west, unable to bear the emptiness they left behind. The trunk contained another part of his past, one he'd tried even harder to bury. His medical instruments untouched since he'd arrived in Arizona. Before the war made him a sharpshooter, Samuel Hayes had been Dr. Hayes, a respected physician. But that man had died long before Samuel reached these desert lands. The woman stirred fever-spiking as night fell. She thrashed weakly, muttering in Apache. Samuel replaced the cloth on her forehead and considered his options. Her condition was worsening. Without proper medical attention, she might not survive the night. His eyes went to the trunk. The key hung on a leather cord around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, a weight he carried always. His hand moved to it unconsciously, fingers closing around the metal through the fabric. But he couldn't do it. Instead, he mixed a folk remedy of willow bark tea that Eleanor had once used for Lily's fevers. It wasn't medicine, not real medicine, but it was all he would allow himself to offer. As Samuel held the cup to the woman's lips, coaxing small sips into her, she murmured a name, Takoda. Then more clearly, Nayeli. "Is that your name?" Samuel asked softly. "Nayeli." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on him with surprising clarity before closing again. Samuel settled into the chair beside the bed, prepared for a long night. As Nayeli drifted between consciousness and delirium, Samuel found himself speaking aloud to the photograph. "I won't fail again," he whispered, and "not this time." Outside, coyotes called across the desert, their lonely cries echoing Samuel's isolation. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light reaching through the windows. Samuel, who had dozed fitfully, awoke to find Nayeli watching him. The fever had broken, and her eyes were clear and alert, studying him with cautious intelligence. "Water?" she said in perfect, unaccented English. Samuel, startled, then reached for the canteen. "You speak English." "Better than most who were born to it," she replied after drinking deeply. Her voice, though rough from dehydration, carried a natural musicality. I was an interpreter between my people and the army before the troubles began. Samuel nodded, processing this information. The sign they hung around your neck, what does it mean? Nayeli's hand went to her throat, feeling the raw skin. It marks me as a disease carrier, a bringer of death. Bitterness crept into her voice. My son Takoda died of a strange sickness 5 months ago. After his death, drought came to our people and more fell ill. Ravenhawk, our medicine man, declared I was cursed, that my presence poisoned the tribe. As Nayeli described her son's symptoms, swollen throat, gray membrane, struggling breath, medical knowledge surfaced unbidden in Samuel's mind. Diphtheria. The symptoms were unmistakable. He'd seen it sweep through army camps during the war, killing indiscriminately. The disease that had taken his family 3 years ago had been influenza, but the memories of helplessness, as they slipped away, were the same. How old was your son? Samuel asked, keeping his medical recognition to himself. 5 winters, Nayeli replied, a shadow passing over her face. Strong and clever, until the sickness came. She studied him intently. You have lost children too. I see it in your eyes. Samuel's gaze flickered to the photograph. My daughter Lily, and my wife Eleanor, 3 years ago. The same sickness. No, different but equally merciless. A moment of understanding passed between them, the unspoken fellowship of those who had watched helplessly as loved ones slipped away. Then Samuel rose, uncomfortable with the intimacy of shared grief. You should rest, he said. I'll make something to eat. As he moved about the cabin, preparing a simple meal, Samuel felt Nayeli's eyes following him. She was evaluating him just as he'd been evaluating her. Survivors learn to assess threats quickly. You have a name, she asked as he brought her a plate. Samuel Hayes. Why did you save me, Samuel Hayes? Most white men would ride past an Apache burial. He considered the question. I've seen enough death to last several lifetimes. Seemed wrong to watch another happen if I could prevent it. Nayeli accepted this with a slight nod. They ate in silence, the simple act of sharing food building a fragile bridge between their separate worlds. The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Samuel moved to the window, Winchester in hand, and peered through a gap in the shutters. 3 riders approached from the direction of town. Sheriff Miles Dawson, flanked by 2 men Samuel recognized as working for Judge Harlan Crawford, the wealthiest man in the territory. Stay inside, Samuel told Nayeli. Whatever happens, keep out of sight. He stepped onto the porch rifle held casually but visibly across his body. Sheriff Dawson reined his horse to a stop several yards from the cabin, the other 2 men spreading out slightly to flank him. A military formation that suggested they'd served during the war. Dawson was tall with a drooping mustache and perpetually narrowed eyes. His tin star caught the morning sunlight as he shifted in his saddle. Hayes, he called. Got word you brought in some Apache woman. That true? Samuel kept his expression neutral. What happens on my land is my business, Sheriff. Harboring hostiles is against territorial law, Dawson replied. Judge Crawford sent us to remind you of that fact. The mention of Crawford explained the visit. The judge, who had neither legal training nor official appointment, owned most of the businesses in Redemption, along with the largest ranch and several mining operations. He'd been pressuring smaller landholders to sell out for months using increasingly less subtle tactics. Since when does Crawford determine territorial law? Samuel asked. One of Crawford's men, a scar-faced brute called Jenkins, spat tobacco juice in the dirt. Word is, she's a witch, cursed. Her own people buried her alive. The judge wants a word with you anyway, Dawson continued. About your land. He's prepared to make a generous offer, especially considering recent Apache raids have most folks selling for whatever they can get. Samuel noted the implied threat. My land's not for sale. Never has been, never will be. Crawford's particularly interested in that spring of yours, Jenkins added, his eyes darting to the herb garden visible from the porch. And whatever it is you're growing back there, those ain't normal crops. Samuel's grip on the Winchester tightened almost imperceptibly. How much did Crawford know about his garden? You've had your warning, Hayes, Dawson said, turning his horse. Crawford won't take kindly to you sheltering Apache, especially with the raids lately. We'll be back. I'd reconsider that decision, Sheriff, Samuel replied evenly, working the lever on his Winchester just loud enough for them to hear. I served with the 3rd Virginia Cavalry. 23 confirmed kills at range. Most were wearing uniforms, but bullets don't much care about badges. The sheriff's face darkened, but he gave a curt nod and turned his horse. The 3 men rode away, but the threat lingered like gun smoke. Samuel watched until they disappeared from sight before returning inside. Nayeli stood by the window, having heard everything. They will come back, she said, not a question. Yes, Samuel agreed, checking his ammunition supply. They always do. By evening, Nayeli had recovered enough strength to move about the cabin. Samuel found her examining his herb garden with professional interest. These are not common plants, she observed. Mountain golden seal, echinacea, valerian. These are healing plants. Samuel stiffened. Just things I've picked up over the years, useful for trading. Nayeli's fingers traced the leaves of a carefully tended foxglove plant. This one is medicine, but also poison if prepared wrongly. She turned to him, her expression direct. You are a medicine man. No. The denial came too quickly. Just a homesteader. Your hands, she persisted. When you tended my wounds, they are healer's hands. I have known such hands before. Samuel turned away, uncomfortable with her perception. You should rest. Those warriors might come back. Nayeli allowed the subject to drop, but her eyes remained thoughtful as she watched him move about the cabin. Later, as they ate dinner, she asked, Will you teach me to use your weapons? Samuel looked up, surprised. Why? Those who tried to kill me will try again. Sheriff and his men will come back. I will not be helpless. There was logic to her request, though Samuel suspected teaching an Apache to shoot might only give Crawford more ammunition against him. Still, he couldn't deny her the means to defend herself. Tomorrow, he agreed, we'll start with the Remington. It's smaller than the Colt. Better for your hands. Nayeli nodded, satisfied. And I will show you how to use the plants in your garden properly. Fair trade. Samuel almost refused, then reconsidered. Her knowledge might be valuable, and the exchange would keep her from asking more questions about his medical background. Deal, he said. That night, Samuel gave Nayeli the bed again, making himself a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. Unable to sleep, he stepped outside onto the porch. The night air had cooled considerably, a small mercy of desert life. He pulled the key from around his neck and studied it in the moonlight, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. The trunk contained more than just his medical instruments. It held his past, the life he'd abandoned after failing to save his family. Dr. Samuel Hayes had been respected confidant, a man who believed in his ability to heal. But when Eleanor and Lily fell ill, all his knowledge had proven useless. He'd watched them die, powerless to stop it. I'm sorry, he whispered to the stars. The old cavalry wound in his left arm ached dully, a long scar that ran from shoulder to elbow. a reminder of the last time he'd tried to save a life on a battlefield, only to watch the man die anyway. When he returned inside, Nayeli was awake, watching him from the bed. Neither spoke of his night vigil, but something had changed between them. A recognition of shared brokenness that needed no words. After breakfast, Samuel kept his promise to begin weapons training. In the corral behind the cabin, he set up empty cans on the fence posts and demonstrated the basics of the Remington revolver. "Hold it firmly," he instructed, guiding her grip. "Both hands until you're comfortable. Sight along the barrel, not over it." Nayeli's hands trembled slightly, at first unused to the weapon's weight. Samuel stood behind her, adjusting her stance. "Breathe out slowly as you squeeze the trigger. Never jerk it." Her first shot went wide, the recoil surprising her. But she firmed her jaw, resumed her stance, and tried again. The second shot knocked a can from the post. "Good," Samuel nodded. Again. They practiced for hours, the desert sun climbing higher as Nayeli's confidence with the weapon grew. By midday, she could hit the target more often than not, her hands steady and her eyes focused. "In this world," Samuel told her as they collected the cans, "there are two kinds of people. Those who can defend themselves and those who die waiting for others to defend them." Nayeli considered this, weighing the Remington in her palm. "My people would say there are those who live in harmony with the world, and those who fight against it." "And which are you?" Samuel asked. A sad smile touched her lips. "Once I knew, now I am learning new ways to survive." As they walked back to the cabin, Nayeli paused at the herb garden. "Now I teach you," she said, kneeling beside the plants. "This one, echinacea, my people use for snake bite and infected wounds. We boil the roots." For the next hour, she shared knowledge passed down through generations, explaining which parts of each plant were useful and how to prepare them. Samuel listened attentively, surprised at how much her knowledge aligned with formal medical training, though expressed in different terms. "This valerian," she said, "helps with sleep when the mind is troubled by bad dreams." Samuel thought of his sleepless nights. "Does it work?" "Sometimes the medicine is not enough," Nayeli replied. "Sometimes the spirit must also heal." That evening, as they ate dinner, she finally asked directly, "What do you keep in the locked box that you fear so much?" Samuel stared at her, startled by her perception. "I don't fear it." "You never look at it," she observed. "Your eyes avoid that corner. Your body turns away when you pass it. These are signs of fear or pain." Samuel set down his fork, appetite gone. "Some things are better left buried." "Like me," Nayeli challenged, her dark eyes intense. "Is that not what your people would say, that some truths should stay buried?" Samuel had no answer. After dinner, he retreated to the porch, uncomfortable with how easily this woman had identified the wounds he'd worked so hard to conceal. The next morning, Samuel announced his intention to ride into redemption. "I need to know what that sign says," he explained, pointing to the wooden tablet on the table, "and to find out what Crawford is planning." Nayeli nodded, understanding the logic, but visibly uneasy about being left alone. Samuel showed her where he kept extra ammunition for the Remington and how to bar the door from inside. "I'll be back before dark," he promised. "Anyone but me tries to enter, you shoot. Understand?" "I understand," she replied, the revolver already comfortable in her hand. Redemption barely deserved the name town. A dusty collection of buildings straddling the stage road, it served the scattered ranches and mines of the territory. Samuel tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dim light. In the corner sat Ezra, Old Scout Whitman, a former Army scout now in his 60s, who knew more about the territory and its native peoples than anyone. His weathered face cracked into a grin as Samuel approached. "Hayes?" He nodded. "Heard you've been making friends with the locals." Samuel slid onto the bench across from him. "News travels fast. Always does." Ezra took a sip of whiskey, especially when it involves Crawford's interests. Samuel placed the wooden sign on the table. "Need to know what this says." Ezra examined it, running a gnarled finger over the carved symbols. "Apache writing," he confirmed. "Means disease carrier or bringer of death. It's a death sentence for them, worse than a quick execution. Means they believe the person is spiritually contaminated." "Found it around the neck of a woman they'd buried alive," Samuel explained. "Crawford sent Dawson to my place yesterday." Ezra leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Crawford's hiring guns, Samuel. Lots of them. Claims it's for protection against Apache raids, but word is he wants to drive out all the smallholders by winter." He took another sip of whiskey. "And he's made some kind of deal with the Apache, or at least with their medicine man, trading access to hunting grounds for peace." Samuel frowned. "Since when do Apache trust Crawford's promises?" "They don't, but their situation's desperate. Diphtheria's spreading through the camps. At least that's what it sounds like from the symptoms. Dozens dead already, mostly children." Ezra gave Samuel a knowing look. "Kind of situation that might benefit from a doctor's expertise." Samuel's expression hardened. "I'm not a doctor anymore. Man doesn't stop being what he is just because he stops practicing. You were one of the best battlefield surgeons in the Virginia regiments. Saved my nephew at Gettysburg." He tapped the wooden sign. "The woman you found, she have a name. Nayeli. Says she was an interpreter before the Troubles." Recognition flickered in Ezra's eyes. "I know her. Good woman. Married a warrior named Mak. Means bear in their tongue. Had a son, if I recall. The boy died. Diphtheria from the symptoms she described." Ezra nodded sadly. "That'd do it. Apache believes some deaths carry spiritual pollution. If the medicine man declared her cursed..." He didn't need to finish. "There's something else," Ezra added, his voice dropping further. "Crawford's been buying up strange supplies, chemicals, laboratory equipment. Has some Eastern fellow staying at his ranch, calls himself a scientist." He shrugged. "Might be nothing but..." The saloon doors swung open, and two men entered. Jenkins and the other hired gun who'd accompanied Sheriff Dawson to Samuel's cabin. They spotted Samuel immediately, hands moving instinctively toward their holsters. "Well, if it ain't the Indian lover," Jenkins sneered. Samuel kept his voice level. "I'm finishing my drink, then leaving. No trouble needed." "Maybe trouble found you anyway," the second man said, moving to flank him. What happened next took less than 5 seconds. Jenkins drew first, his movement telegraphed by the tensing of his shoulder. Samuel's Colt cleared leather as he pushed away from the table, the first shot taking Jenkins' center mass. Continuing the motion, Samuel dropped to one knee as the second man fired his bullet, splintering the wood where Samuel's head had been a moment before. Samuel's second shot caught him in the chest. The saloon fell silent except for the ringing in Samuel's ears and the heavy thud as both bodies hit the floor. Samuel felt the burn before he saw the blood. The second man's bullet had grazed his left arm, opening a shallow furrow just below the old war wound. Not serious, but it would need attention. Ezra was already beside him. "You need to ride now. Crawford will have the whole town after you." Samuel holstered his gun and moved toward the door, stepping carefully around the bodies. "Watch yourself, Ezra." "Always do," the old scout replied. "But Samuel, Whatever Crawford's up to with those chemicals and that scientist, it ain't natural. Be careful." Samuel mounted his horse and rode hard out of town, blood soaking his shirt sleeve. He took a circuitous route back to the cabin, watching for pursuers and stopping once to roughly bandage the wound with his neckerchief. By the time he reached home, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Nayeli was waiting on the porch, Remington in hand. Her eyes widened at the sight of his bloody arm. "Inside," she said simply, holding the door open. In the cabin, she cut away his shirt sleeve and examined the wound with practiced hands. "Not deep," she assessed. "Need cleaning." She worked methodically, using a mixture of herbs she'd gathered, boiled in hot water to clean the wound. Her touch was gentle but firm, the hands of someone who had tended injuries before. "You fought," she said, not a question. "Crawford's men. Won't be the last time." Nayeli nodded, as if this confirmed something. When she'd finished bandaging his arm, she asked, "What did the old scout tell you?" Samuel explained what he'd learned about the sign Crawford's plans and the diphtheria outbreak in the Apache camps. He hesitated, then added, "Ezra also mentioned Crawford, buying chemicals and hosting some scientist from back east. Mean anything to you?" A shadow passed over Nayeli's face. "Perhaps. Before the sickness came to our camp, strange men were seen near our water source, white men with equipment. They left barrels behind. Ravenhawk said they were making peace offerings, but many who drank that water fell ill first." Samuel's medical mind raced with implications. Contaminated water. Chemicals. "A deliberate outbreak. The sign," he said, refocusing. "Ezra confirmed it marks you as a disease carrier." Nayeli's hand went to her throat, where the raw skin was still healing. "Yes, but there is more to the story than I told you." Her eyes met his, measuring, deciding. "Tonight, I will tell you truth, and perhaps you will share your truth as well." As darkness fell, the pain in Samuel's arm grew worse. Nayeli mixed a tea from the herbs in his garden, valerian willow bark and others. It helped dull the throbbing, but fever began to set in as the night progressed. In his feverish state, Samuel's defenses weakened. He found himself talking about James, his friend and fellow soldier who had died under his care despite Samuel's best efforts to save him. The wound had been too severe, the femoral artery severed by a Union bullet at Petersburg. "I could have let him go quickly," Samuel murmured, eyes unfocused. "Would have been mercy. But I tried to save him, made him suffer for hours before the end." Nayeli listened silently, bathing his forehead with cool cloths. "Sometimes living is harder than dying," she said softly. "This I know." As the fever peaked, Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness. In his delirium, he saw Eleanor and Lily, heard their labored breathing as the influenza took them, felt again the crushing despair as all his medical knowledge proved useless against the disease ravaging their bodies. "I'm sorry," he whispered repeatedly. "I'm so sorry." Cool hands held his, a voice anchoring him to the present. "You are not alone in your grief, Samuel Hayes. We are both survivors when we should not be." Dawn broke with Samuel's fever finally breaking. He awoke to find Nayeli sitting beside the bed, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. She had moved him to the bed at some point, and now sat in the chair he had occupied during her own illness. "How long was I delirious?" he asked, his throat dry. "Many hours. You spoke of many things." She handed him water. "Of your wife and daughter, of James, of being a doctor." Samuel closed his eyes, reality crashing back, his secrets revealed in fevered ramblings. "You were a healer," Nayeli said softly. "This explains much." Samuel turned his face away. I was a failure as a healer. Everyone I tried to save died anyway. Not everyone, Nayeli countered. The old scout spoke of his nephew. One success among countless failures. Nayeli was silent for a moment. I have not told you all my truth either, she finally said. It is time for that now. Samuel looked at her, noticing the deep sadness etched around her eyes, a grief that mirrored his own. I told you my son died of the sickness. This is true, but I did not tell you all. Nayeli moved to the window, staring out at the brightening day. When Dakota first showed signs of illness, I knew what would come. I had seen the sickness before at the fort, where I interpreted. I knew no medicine of my people could save him. Her voice remained steady, but her hands gripped the windowsill tightly. Among my people, if a firstborn dies of illness, it is seen as a bad omen. The mother is believed to have displeased the spirits. So when Dakota could no longer breathe well, I took him away from the village, told my husband I was gathering healing plants. I stayed with him until the end came. Then I buried him in secret beneath an ancient juniper tree. I returned to the village and said he was improving. Her voice finally broke. For weeks I maintained this lie, but children are missed. Questions were asked, and when drought came, followed by more sickness, Ravenhawk began to suspect. She turned to face Samuel, her expression composed once more. They found the grave. Mach, my husband, renounced me before the tribe. Ravenhawk declared me cursed. The burial you witnessed was their judgment. Samuel understood the impossible choice she had faced, between tribal law and a mother's love. You did what you thought was right for your son, he said finally. As you did for your family, she replied. Yet we both carry the weight of our choices. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Two souls scarred by loss, finding unexpected recognition in each other's pain. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a single rider coming fast. Samuel reached for his Winchester, but his weakened state made the movement clumsy. Nayeli handed him the rifle. I will see who comes. She peered cautiously through the window, then relaxed slightly. It is the old scout. He is wounded. Samuel struggled to his feet as Nayeli opened the door. Ezra stumbled inside, blood soaking his left sleeve and side. His face was ashen beneath its weathered tan. They're coming, he gasped as Samuel helped him to a chair. Crawford made a deal with the Apache, trading you and the woman for hunting rights. Sheriffs deputized half the town, 20 men at least. He winced as Nayeli began examining his wounds. Dawn tomorrow. They think you're still hurt bad. But that's not the worst of it, Ezra continued, his voice strained with pain. I got into Crawford's office, found papers. That scientist of his ain't studying the land. He's studying disease, deliberate contamination. He pulled a folded paper from inside his shirt and handed it to Samuel. Map of all the water sources they've poisoned, including the Apache camps. Samuel unfolded the map with shaking hands. Red marks indicated locations throughout the territory, including the spring behind his cabin. Crawford wants everyone gone, settlers and Apache alike, Ezra wheezed. Something big in these hills, something worth killing for. Samuel and Nayeli exchanged glances. Their situation had just become far more dire than a simple land grab. How badly are you hit? Samuel asked, professional assessment overriding personal concerns. Bullet went through the arm clean, Ezra reported. But the one in my side is still there. Hurts like hell when I breathe. Without thinking, Samuel knelt beside the old scout, fingers probing the wound with practiced precision. Missed the lung, but it needs to come out. He glanced up at Nayeli. In the garden, bring me golden seal and yarrow. And there's whiskey in the cabinet. She nodded, hurrying outside. Samuel hesitated only a moment before crossing to the trunk. The key felt heavy as he inserted it into the lock, the click loud in the quiet cabin. Inside his medical bag lay exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago, the leather worn but still serviceable. His hands trembled slightly as he removed the instruments, forceps, scalpel, suture, needles. The familiar weight of them brought back a flood of memories, both good and terrible. When Nayeli returned with the herbs, she found Samuel transformed. Gone was the hesitation, the haunted look. In its place was focus and certainty, the physician emerging from the shell of the man. "Boil water," he instructed, "and tear that clean shirt into strips for bandages." For the next hour, Samuel worked methodically to extract the bullet from Ezra's side, his movements precise despite his own recent injury. Nayeli assisted silently, handing him instruments and herbs as needed, watching with obvious respect as he worked. When he finally dropped the misshapen lead ball into a basin, Ezra let out a long breath. "Still got the touch, Doc," he murmured, before the whiskey and pain dragged him into unconsciousness. Samuel stitched the wound closed with neat, even sutures, then bound it with the herbal poultice Nayeli had prepared. Only when he'd finished did he realize what he'd done. Stepped back into the role he'd sworn to abandon. "You are a healer," Nayeli said quietly. "It is in your blood, in your hands. You cannot change this about yourself." Samuel looked down at his blood-stained hands, then at the instruments laid out on the table, the tools of a trade he'd both loved and hated, symbols of his greatest triumphs and most devastating failures. "We have until dawn," he said, deliberately changing the subject. "We need to prepare." Through the night, they worked to fortify the cabin. Samuel, despite his own injuries, dug shallow trenches behind the corral that could provide cover during a firefight. Nayeli prepared more of the herbal medicines, anticipating wounds to come. Ezra, when he regained consciousness, offered tactical advice from his days scouting for the army. As they worked, the bond between Samuel and Nayeli strengthened, forged in shared danger and mutual respect. They moved together with increasing coordination, anticipating each other's needs with minimal communication. In the pre-dawn hours, they paused to rest. Ezra had fallen asleep again, his breathing steady if shallow. Samuel and Nayeli sat on the porch, watching the stars gradually fade as the eastern sky lightened. "If we survive tomorrow," Nayeli said softly, "what then?" Samuel had been asking himself the same question. "I don't know," he admitted. "Can't stay here if Crawford wants the land this badly. Might head further west. California, maybe." Nayeli nodded thoughtfully. "My people say the ocean is like the desert, vast and merciless, but also beautiful." "You'd come with me?" Samuel asked, surprised. "Where else would I go?" she replied simply. "My people believe I bring death. Your people see only my skin. But you—" Her eyes met his in the dim light. "You see me," Samuel was about to respond, when she suddenly stiffened, her gaze fixed on the horizon. In the growing light, he could make out the silhouettes of mounted figures, at least 6 Apache warriors, led by a tall man with distinctive feathers in his hair. "Mak," Nayeli whispered, recognizing her former husband even at this distance. "And he's not alone," Samuel added grimly, pointing to the opposite ridge, where dust clouds signaled another group approaching. Crawford's men arriving earlier than expected. They were caught between 2 enemies with nowhere to run. Samuel stood Winchester ready. "Get inside. Wake Ezra." The coming dawn promised blood. In that moment, Samuel knew his past and future were colliding in ways he could never have imagined. The doctor he'd tried to bury was about to face his greatest test, not just saving lives, but exposing a conspiracy that threatened an entire territory. And at his side stood a woman marked for death by her own people, whose courage might be the only thing standing between them and destruction. The dawn broke blood-red across the Arizona sky, casting long shadows over Samuel Hayes's cabin. He stood motionless on the porch, Winchester braced against his shoulder, eyes narrowed against the harsh light. Behind him, Nayeli positioned herself at the south window, Remington steady in her hands. Inside, Ezra Whitman had dragged himself to the north-facing window despite his injuries, shotgun laid across the sill. They were surrounded. From the east came Mock and his Apache warriors, 6 strong faces painted for battle. From the west approached Sheriff Dawson, with at least a dozen men, Crawford's hired guns, given the thin veneer of law. The air hung still and heavy, with the promise of violence. "They'll try to talk first," Samuel said quietly. "Crawford wants something, or he wouldn't have brought so many men." Nayeli nodded, her dark eyes scanning the approaching forces. "What do we do? Listen. Learn what they want. Then decide." Samuel studied the two groups as they registered each other's presence. Neither seemed pleased by the complication, and hoped they're too busy watching each other to coordinate properly. Sheriff Dawson raised his hand, halting his men about 100 yards from the cabin. Mock did the same on the opposite side, the two forces now forming a rough half-circle around the property. Dawson spurred his horse forward alone, stopping 50 yards out. "Hayes," he called, "Judge Crawford wants a word with you. Come out peaceful-like, and no one needs to get hurt." Samuel remained silent, watching as Mock urged his horse forward to match Dawson's position. The Apache warrior's face was impassive, but his eyes burned with intensity as he scanned the cabin windows. "The woman belongs to the people," Mock called in his heavily accented English. "White man has no right to interfere in tribal matters." Samuel glanced back at Nayeli. Her knuckles had whitened around the Remington, but her expression remained resolute. "They're working together," Ezra whispered from his position, "pretending to be enemies, but neither's made a move against the other." Samuel nodded, then stepped forward on the porch, keeping the Winchester ready. "Dawson," he called, "I know about the contaminated water. I know what Crawford's doing to the Apache camps and the homesteads. If he wants to talk, tell him to come himself." The sheriff's face tightened with surprise. "You're in no position to make demands, Hayes. We've got you outnumbered 20-1. "And yet you haven't attacked," Samuel countered evenly. "Which means you need something intact." Samuel shifted his attention to Mock. "And you? Does your tribe know you're working with the man poisoning their water? The man responsible for your children's deaths?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed the warrior's face. "White man lies," he growled, but the conviction in his voice had wavered. "Show him Nayeli," Samuel called. Nayeli stepped onto the porch, holding up Ezra's map with its marked water sources, including those near the Apache camps. "This is why our people sicken and die," she called to Mock in Apache, then repeated in English. "Crawford poisons the water to drive everyone away. Your children die for his greed." A murmur ran through both groups of men. Several of Dawson's deputies exchanged troubled looks. "Enough!" Dawson shouted, drawing his pistol. "Hayes, surrender now, or we start shooting." Before Samuel could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, cultured with an Eastern accent. "Perhaps we should try a more civilized approach." All eyes turned to a rider approaching from the south, a slender man in an expensive suit riding a magnificent black stallion. Behind him came two more horsemen, one of whom Samuel recognized immediately as Judge Harlan Crawford. The third rider was Ravenhawk, the Apache medicine man. "Dr. Victor Thorne," the man in front announced, reining his horse to a stop beside Dawson. "Chief researcher for the Western Territories Mining Consortium," his cold eyes fixed on Samuel. "And you, sir, are interfering with a matter of significant financial importance." Crawford, corpulent and florid-faced, urged his horse forward. "Hayes?" He nodded curtly. "I see you've met my associate. Dr. Thorne has been conducting important research on behalf of our investors." "Research that involves poisoning water supplies?" Samuel asked, keeping his rifle trained on the newcomers. "Deliberately spreading disease among innocent people." Thorne smiled thinly. "Clinical trials, Mr. Hayes. The effects of certain mineral compounds on population migration patterns. Purely scientific." "You mean murder?" Nayeli said, her voice carrying clearly. "Children dying in agony is not science." Ravenhawk remained silent, his painted face unreadable beneath his elaborate headdress. But Samuel noticed how the medicine man avoided looking at the Apache warriors, focusing instead on Crawford, with an expression that mingled fear and resentment. "I understand you're a physician yourself, Hayes," Thorne continued, ignoring Nayeli. "Former battlefield surgeon with quite the reputation during the war. Your expertise could be valuable to our operation." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. "In exchange for what?" "Your land, of course," Crawford interjected, "and your silence regarding our methods. But primarily, we need your medical knowledge. Dr. Thorne's experiments have been somewhat imprecise in their application." The cold calculation in their voices made Samuel's stomach turn. These men spoke of mass poisoning with the casual indifference of discussing crop rotation. "There's silver in these hills, Hayes," Crawford continued, sweeping his arm to encompass the surrounding landscape. "More than anyone realizes. Worth millions. But mining requires control of water sources and absence of competing interests." His gaze flicked dismissively toward Mach and his warriors. "The Apache lands contain the richest veins. Land that will be ours once the tribes are relocated or eliminated. Your spring feeds one of the primary watersheds. We need it." Samuel felt cold fury building inside him. These men had deliberately caused a diphtheria outbreak, the same disease that had killed Nayeli's son, as part of a land-grabbing scheme. "And the Apache?" Samuel asked, nodding toward Mach. "What did you promise them?" Crawford smiled. "Ravenhawk has been most cooperative. In exchange for certain considerations, he's agreed to relocate his people to the northern reservation, after they execute their cursed woman, of course. A demonstration of good faith." Nayeli spoke rapidly in Apache, directed at Mach. "He lies. Once our people are gone from our ancestral lands, they will poison the reservation water too. Look at the map." Mach's stoic expression wavered as his eyes moved from Nayeli to Ravenhawk. The medicine man finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of tribal authority. "The woman speaks with poisoned tongue," he proclaimed. "Her curse brings death to all around her." But doubt had been planted. Several warriors muttered among themselves, their eyes now fixed suspiciously on Crawford. "Enough talk," Dawson snapped, cocking his pistol. "Hayes, this is your last chance." Samuel exchanged a quick glance with Nayeli, then nodded almost imperceptibly toward the east side of the property, where the garden and spring lay. She understood immediately. "Sheriff," Samuel called, buying time. "You're about to start a massacre for a man who's poisoning your own water, too. That map shows every water source in the territory, including the town well. A ripple of unease passed through the deputies. "He's lying," Crawford said sharply. "Thorne, handle this." The scientist nodded and made a subtle gesture. Two men with long-barreled rifles moved into position on the flanks, sharpshooters taking aim. "I think we've exhausted the diplomatic approach," Thorne said coldly. The first shot cracked across the morning air, splintering the wood of the porch inches from Samuel's foot. He dove back through the doorway, pulling Nayeli with him as more bullets tore into the cabin's exterior. The battle had begun. From his position by the north window, Ezra returned fire with his shotgun, the blast catching one of Crawford's men in the chest as he tried to advance. Outside, chaos erupted as both groups began shooting, some at the cabin, others at each other, as Mock's warriors realized the extent of Crawford's betrayal. "The medicine cabinet," Samuel instructed Nayeli as they crawled across the floor. "Third shelf, small brown bottle labeled sulfur, and the one next to it with the skull marking." She looked at him questioningly. "Those chemicals Thorne's using," Samuel explained, checking his Winchester. "Two can play at that game." While Nayeli retrieved the bottles, Samuel joined Ezra, who had propped himself against the wall, face gray with pain, but eyes alert. "Can you cover the front?" Samuel asked. Ezra nodded grimly. "Long as my eyes stay open. We need 10 minutes. Then we're heading out the back toward the spring." "I'll buy you time," Ezra promised. "But Hayes, that scientist fella ain't just any hired gun. The way he moves, the way he watches. Military training, I'd wager. Watch him." Samuel squeezed the old man's shoulder in acknowledgement, then rejoined Nayeli at the kitchen table where she'd gathered the requested supplies, along with several items from his medical trunk. "What are we making?" she asked as Samuel quickly mixed the contents in a larger container. "Smoke bombs, mainly," he replied, working with the swift precision of his medical training. "But this one," he held up a smaller vial of yellowish liquid, "this will neutralize some of what they've been putting in the water." Nayeli watched his hands move with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before." "During the war," Samuel confirmed, not looking up. "Medicine isn't always about healing. Sometimes it's about chemistry, effects on the human body." His voice hardened. "Thorne isn't the only one who understands these principles." Outside, the gunfire intensified. Through the windows they could see the battle had fragmented. Mock and 3 warriors were engaged in a firefight with several of Crawford's men, while Dawson and others had taken positions surrounding the cabin. Ravenhawk had disappeared, as had Crawford himself. But Thorne remained visible, calmly directing his sharpshooters from behind the cover of a large boulder. One of them had climbed to a higher position on the ridge and was systematically firing at any movement within the cabin. "Almost done," Samuel said, corking the last makeshift bomb. "These will create enough confusion for us to reach the spring. From there we can access the cave system that runs beneath the eastern ridge." Nayeli looked up sharply. "Caves." Samuel nodded. "Found them my first year here. They connect to an old Apache sacred site, if I'm not mistaken." "The Speaking Stones," Nayeli whispered. "A place of truth in our legends." "How did you know?" "I didn't," Samuel admitted. "But it's our best chance. The entrance is hidden behind the pool, underwater." A bullet thudded into the table between them, sending splinters flying. The sharpshooter had adjusted his position for a clearer line of sight. "Time to move," Samuel decided. He handed Nayeli 2 smoke bombs and the neutralizing agent. "Keep these safe. That vial needs to reach the main watershed." She tucked them carefully into her waist pouch, then checked the Remington one last time. Samuel crossed back to Ezra, who had just fired another blast through the window, forcing several attackers to retreat. "We're going now," Samuel told him. "Come with us." Ezra shook his head. "Can't swim?" Can't run, can barely stand. I'd only slow you down." He handed Samuel a folded piece of paper. "Besides, I got another job to do. There's a federal marshal in Tucson. Name's on that paper. Friend of mine. Get that map to him." Samuel wanted to argue, but the determined look in Ezra's eyes told him it would be futile. "It's been an honor," Samuel said instead, clasping Ezra's hand. "Likewise, Doc." Ezra managed a pained grin. "Now, get going. I feel like making some noise." Samuel rejoined Nayeli at the rear door. "On my signal," he instructed, handing her the Winchester while keeping the Colt for himself. "Head straight for the spring. Don't stop for anything." She nodded, her expression resolute despite the fear visible in her eyes. "Ready? Now." Samuel kicked open the door and immediately threw two chemical concoctions in opposite directions. They burst on impact, releasing thick, acrid smoke that billowed rapidly in the morning air. Ezra, true to his word, began firing the shotgun repeatedly from the front windows, creating the impression of multiple defenders. Samuel and Nayeli sprinted toward the spring and garden. Bullets kicked up dirt around them, but the smoke provided enough cover to confuse the attackers' aim. They were halfway there when a figure loomed suddenly through the smoke. Ravenhawk, his painted face contorted with rage. "Cursed woman!" he shouted, raising a ceremonial war club. Nayeli fired without hesitation. Ravenhawk staggered, but didn't fall, blood spreading across his shoulder. "The spirits reject you," he snarled, advancing again. Samuel stepped between them, Colt aimed at the medicine man's chest. "The spirits didn't poison your people," he said coldly. "You did. For what? Crawford's gold." Uncertainty flickered across Ravenhawk's face. "The White Chief promised our people would be spared. Only the weak would die. A sacrifice for the tribe's survival." "He lied," Nayeli said in Apache. "Show him the map, Samuel." Samuel held up the map with his free hand, pointing to the marks indicating all Apache water sources, including those at the northern reservation. "Everyone dies in Crawford's plan," Samuel said quietly. "Including you, once you're no longer useful." The medicine man's eyes widened as understanding dawned on him. Then from the direction of the cabin came a tremendous explosion. Ezra had apparently found Samuel's store of ammunition and created a diversion bigger than any of them had anticipated. In that moment of distraction, Samuel grabbed Nayeli's arm and pulled her toward the spring. Behind them, Ravenhawk made no move to follow his worldview, visibly shattering around him. They reached the spring, a deep, clear pool surrounded by rocks and Samuel's herb garden. Without hesitation, he moved the largest of the border stones, revealing a narrow gap behind the main pool. "Through here," he instructed. "The underwater passage is short, 15 feet at most. I'll go first, you follow." A bullet struck the rock beside his head. Samuel turned to see Thorn approaching through the dissipating smoke, revolver in hand, his elegant suit incongruous against the backdrop of battle. "Fascinating improvisation, Dr. Hayes," Thorn called, "but I'm afraid your experiment ends here." Samuel positioned himself to shield Nayeli, his own Colt raised. "You've been poisoning innocent people," he said. "Children, families, for what? Silver, progress doctor." Thorn replied, his voice carrying the fervor of a true believer. "The march of civilization requires sacrifices. Surely a military surgeon understands this concept." Thorn's cold smile widened slightly. "How many men died under your care during the war? How many suffered while you decided who could be saved and who couldn't?" His eyes gleamed with zealot's intensity. "We're not so different, you and I. We both make calculations involving human lives." The accusation struck at Samuel's deepest doubts. the guilt that had driven him from medicine. For a heartbeat, his resolve wavered. In that moment, Nayeli acted. She hurled one of the remaining smoke bombs directly at Thorn. It burst against his chest, enveloping him in caustic fumes that sent him reeling backward, coughing violently. "Now," she urged, pulling Samuel toward the hidden passage. They plunged into the cool water, swimming through the narrow underwater tunnel. The passage was dark and confined rock, pressing close on all sides. Samuel led the way, one hand trailing along the rough stone ceiling to maintain orientation. Just as his lungs began burning for air, the passage widened and angled upward. They surfaced in a small underground grotto, dimly lit by fissures in the rock overhead that allowed thin beams of sunlight to penetrate the darkness. Gasping for breath, they dragged themselves onto a narrow stone ledge. Behind them, there was no sign of pursuit through the underwater passage. "They'll look for another way in," Samuel predicted, checking to ensure his weapons were relatively dry. "How far to the speaking stones from here?" Nayeli wrung water from her hair, orienting herself. "If this is the passage, I think it is not far. Half-hour walk through the caves." Samuel nodded, then winced as pain shot through his injured cheek. The rock fragments had left several cuts that were beginning to sting as the adrenaline faded. Nayeli noticed immediately. She moved closer, examining the wounds with gentle fingers. Not deep, she assessed, but need cleaning to prevent fever. From her waist pouch, which had remained remarkably dry, she extracted a small packet of herbs. "Chew these," she instructed, "then apply to cuts. Will sting but clean the wounds." Samuel did as directed, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Thank you," he said when the burning subsided. For a moment they sat in silence, recovering their strength. The distant sounds of gunfire had faded, whether from distance or cessation of the battle, they couldn't tell. "Ezra," Samuel said quietly, the realization of what the old scout had sacrificed settling heavily upon him. "He chose his path," Nayeli replied, understanding in her voice. "As a warrior would, with honor." Samuel nodded, accepting the truth of her words, even as grief threatened to overwhelm him. Another death he couldn't prevent. Another friend lost. "We should move," he said, finally pushing himself to his feet. "Lead the way to the speaking stones." Nayeli rose gracefully despite her soaked clothing. "Follow close. The path is not always clear." She led him deeper into the cave system, navigating through tunnels that occasionally narrowed to the point where they had to turn sideways to proceed. The air grew progressively warmer and drier as they moved further from the spring entrance. "How do you know these caves so well?" Samuel asked. "These are sacred to my people," Nayeli explained, her voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "Young women are brought here before marriage to hear the wisdom of the ancestors in the speaking stones. I came here before I married Mach." A shadow passed over her face. "The stones warned of darkness ahead, but I did not listen well enough." Samuel considered this. "What are these speaking stones exactly?" "You will see," she replied. "We are close now." The passage widened, suddenly opening into a vast underground chamber. Samuel stopped in awe at the sight before him. Towering stone columns stretched from floor to ceiling, formed over countless millennia by the patient drip of mineral-laden water. But what made the chamber truly remarkable were the acoustics. Even their quiet breathing seemed to amplify and return from multiple directions, creating a whispering effect that filled the space with ghostly sound. "The ancestors speak here," Nayeli said softly, yet her voice carried throughout the chamber. "Stand in the center and ask your question. The stones will answer." Samuel stepped forward cautiously, moving toward a circular depression in the chamber's center, where the floor had been worn smooth by generations of visitors. The whispering intensified as he approached, though he couldn't make out any distinct words in the sound. "It's the air currents," he began, the scientist in him automatically seeking a rational explanation. "The way the chamber is shaped creates natural acoustics." "Does knowing how the thunder forms make it less the voice of the sky?" Nayeli interrupted gently. "Some mysteries can be explained in many ways, yet remain mysteries." Before Samuel could respond, a new sound reached them, voices echoing from one of the many passages leading into the chamber. "Crawford's men," Samuel whispered immediately, reaching for his Colt. "They must have found another entrance." Nayeli nodded grimly, drawing the Remington. "There are many ways in, once you know to look." They took cover behind one of the massive stone columns as lights appeared at the mouth of the eastern passage. Lanterns carried by at least 3 men, judging by the moving shadows cast on the chamber walls. "Spread out," came a familiar voice. "Thorn! They're in here somewhere. Crawford wants Hayes alive if possible, but kill the woman on sight." Samuel and Nayeli exchanged glances in the dim light. They were outnumbered in unfamiliar terrain, with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. "The western passage." Nayeli breathed her lips close to Samuel's ear. "It leads to the high canyon, but we must cross open ground to reach it." Samuel assessed their options quickly. "I'll create a distraction. You make for the passage." "No," she replied, firmly gripping his arm. "Together or not at all." The intensity in her eyes surprised him. Not just determination, but something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. One of the searchers rounded a column barely 20 feet away. Samuel fired instinctively, the Colt's report deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. The man went down with a cry that echoed throughout the chamber, instantly revealing their position. "There!" Thorne shouted. "Behind the column!" Bullets struck the stone around them, sending fragments flying. Samuel and Nayeli broke cover, simultaneously firing as they ran toward the western passage. 2 more of Crawford's men appeared in their path. Nayeli dropped to one knee, firing with the steady precision Samuel had taught her. One man fell. The other ducked back behind a column. They reached the mouth of the western passage just as Thorne emerged from behind a stalagmite, his revolver leveled at Nayeli's back. Samuel saw the movement from the corner of his eye and shoved her roughly aside. The bullet meant for her grazed his right arm, instead leaving a burning furrow across his bicep. Ignoring the pain, Samuel turned and fired twice more. Thorne disappeared back into cover. "Go!" Samuel urged, and they plunged into the darkness of the western passage. This tunnel was narrower and rougher than those they'd traversed before, forcing them to slow their pace. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers regrouping, the voices becoming fainter as the passage twisted and climbed. "How much further?" Samuel asked, his injured arm throbbing with each heartbeat. "Not far," Nayeli assured him. "The passage opens into a box canyon. From there we can reach the high country." They emerged minutes later into blinding daylight. The passage exit was half hidden behind a stunted juniper tree, opening onto a small plateau surrounded by towering red rock walls on 3 sides. The only way forward appeared to be a narrow trail that switchbacked up the western cliff face. "Up there?" Nayeli pointed. "The trail leads to the old hunting grounds." Samuel nodded, trying to ignore the weakness spreading through him. The bullet graze on his arm was bleeding freely, and combined with his earlier injuries was taking its toll. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the cliff trail when a voice called from above them. "That's far enough, Hayes." Samuel looked up to see Crawford himself standing on a rocky outcropping 30 feet above a rifle aimed directly at them. How the corpulent judge had reached such a position was a mystery, but his meaning was clear enough. "Impressive effort," Crawford continued. "Truly, but ultimately futile. My men are already positioning themselves at the head of every trail out of this canyon." As if to confirm his words, figures appeared along the rim of the canyon walls. At least 6 men, all armed, all with clear lines of fire down to where Samuel and Nayeli stood exposed. "What is it you want, Crawford?" Samuel called, playing for time as he assessed their increasingly dire situation. Crawford smiled thinly. "It was never about your land specifically, Doctor. It's about the watershed. Control the water, control the territory." He gestured toward the surrounding landscape. "There's silver in these hills worth millions, but mining requires water, enormous quantities of it, and the Apache sit on the richest veins of all." "So you poison their water to drive them away," Samuel said, disgust evident in his voice. "Kill their children to clear the land for your mines." "Business," Crawford replied with a shrug. "Nothing personal. The tribes were going to be relocated eventually anyway. We simply accelerated the process." Nayeli stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled fury. "You murdered my son," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the canyon air. "That is personal." For the first time, a flicker of discomfort crossed Crawford's face. "Regrettable collateral damage. But progress demands sacrifice." "And what about the settlers?" Samuel pressed. "You're poisoning their water, too." "Smaller doses," Crawford explained with chilling casualness. "Enough to cause illness, not death. Sufficient to convince them to sell their claims and move on." He smiled coldly. Thorne is quite precise in his formulations. As if summoned by his name, Thorne emerged from the cave passage behind them, revolver trained on Samuel's back. 2 more men followed him, cutting off any retreat. "Speaking of Dr. Thorne," Crawford continued, "he's been most impressed with your medical background, Hayes. Your expertise could be valuable to our operation. The offer I made earlier still stands. Join us, help refine our methods, and you'll be a wealthy man." Samuel felt a cold rage building inside him. "And if I refuse, then you die here and we take your land anyway." Crawford's expression hardened. "But not before you watch what happens to the woman." One of Thorne's men grabbed Nayeli from behind, wrenching the Remington from her grip. She fought fiercely, but was quickly subdued, a knife pressed against her throat. Samuel tensed, his hand tightening on the Colt still holstered at his side. But with enemies on all sides, any move would be suicide. And likely doom Nayeli as well. "What's it going to be, Hayes?" Crawford called. "Wealth and position, or death in this god-forsaken canyon?" Before Samuel could answer, a new sound echoed through the canyon. A war cry, high and piercing, followed by the sharp crack of rifle fire from the northern rim. One of Crawford's men toppled from his position, tumbling down the cliff face to land broken on the rocks below. More shots followed in rapid succession. Along the canyon rim, figures appeared, Apache warriors led by Mach. Crawford's men returned fire, the canyon erupting into chaos. In the confusion, Nayeli drove her elbow hard into her captor's ribs, breaking free of his grip. Samuel drew and fired in one smooth motion, the Colt's bullet taking the man in the chest. "The trail!" Samuel shouted, grabbing Nayeli's arm and pulling her toward the western cliff face. Behind them, Thorne shouted orders to his remaining men, trying to organize a defense against the Apache attack. They reached the base of the trail just as Crawford, panicked by the unexpected assault, fired wildly in their direction. The bullet struck rock inches from Samuel's head, sending fragments slicing into his already injured cheek. They scrambled up the narrow switchback path, bullets kicking up dust around their feet. Halfway up, Samuel risked a glance back at the plateau below. The Apache warriors had descended to engage Crawford's men directly. Among the chaos, he spotted Mock locked in combat with Thorn. Ravenhawk was there too, but to Samuel's surprise, the medicine man was fighting alongside Mock against Crawford's forces. "Keep moving," Nayeli urged, pulling Samuel's attention back to their precarious ascent. They reached the top of the trail as more gunfire erupted below. From their elevated position, they could see the full scope of the battle. Crawford's men were outnumbered and outflanked, caught between the Apache warriors and the sheer canyon walls. "Why," Samuel wondered aloud, catching his breath, "why would Mock come back to help us?" Nayeli's expression was complex. Surprise mingled with something like vindication. "He saw the truth," she said simply, "about Crawford, about the poisoned water." A movement caught Samuel's eye. Crawford himself fleeing toward the cave entrance, abandoning his men to their fate. Thorn was nowhere to be seen. "We need to keep moving," Samuel said, turning away from the battle. "Crawford's still alive, and he'll bring more men. We need to reach that marshal in Tucson." Nayeli nodded, but her eyes remained on the conflict below for a moment longer. "My people fight for justice," she said softly, "even for a woman they once condemned." The high country stretched before them, a vast landscape of mesas and canyons that only the Apache knew intimately. Somewhere to the south lay Tucson, and with it the chance to expose Crawford's crimes. "Which way?" Samuel asked. Nayeli pointed to a distant ridge. "There is a trail that follows the watershed, 3 days' journey on foot." Samuel nodded grimly. His arm throbbed, his face stung from the rock fragments, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle. But determination drove him forward. Crawford had to be stopped before more innocent lives were lost. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when Samuel stumbled suddenly lightheaded. Nayeli caught him before he could fall, her strength surprising for her size. "You need rest," she said firmly, "and your wounds need tending." Samuel wanted to argue, but the medical part of his brain recognized the symptoms of approaching collapse. "A short rest," he conceded. Nayeli guided him to a sheltered overhang where they would be hidden from casual observation. With practiced efficiency, she examined his injuries: the bullet graze on his arm, the cuts on his face, the older wound that had reopened during their escape. "You have fever beginning." She observed her fingers cool against his forehead. Samuel nodded unsurprised. "Infection. Need to clean the wounds properly." Nayeli opened her pouch and extracted the remaining herbs she'd gathered at the cabin. "I will make poultice," she said. "But first, water." She disappeared briefly, returning with a handful of prickly pear fruit. With her knife, she skillfully cut away the spines and outer skin, exposing the moist flesh within. The sweet, juicy pulp was like nectar to Samuel's parched throat. As Nayeli prepared the herbal poultice, he found himself studying her in the slanting afternoon light. The fierce determination that had first struck him when he found her buried in the desert remained, but there was something more now, a quiet dignity that transcended mere survival. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly, looking up from her work. "That first day. You didn't know me. I was just an Apache woman left to die." Samuel considered the question, which seemed to hold new weight now. "I've seen too much death," he said finally. "In the war, in my practice, my family." He paused, searching for words to explain a decision that had been more instinct than reason. "I couldn't save them, but perhaps I could save you." Nayeli nodded slowly, understanding. "Redemption." "Maybe," Samuel acknowledged, "or maybe just basic human decency." "Either way," she said, applying the poultice to his arm with gentle fingers. "You gave me life when my own people had condemned me to death. That creates a bond not easily broken." The intensity of her gaze made Samuel look away first. There was something unspoken growing between them, something neither was ready to name in the midst of their struggle for survival. "We should rest," he said, changing the subject. "A few hours, then continue toward Tucson, under cover of darkness." They slept fitfully as the sun began its descent. Samuel's dreams were troubled. Visions of Eleanor and Lily merged with images of Nayeli buried in the earth, reaching for him with desperate hands. He woke with a start to find the real Nayeli watching him, concern evident in her eyes. "You called out," she said softly. "For your wife, for your daughter." Samuel sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in his injured arm. "I see them sometimes," he admitted, "in dreams, always just out of reach." Nayeli was silent for a moment. "My people believe the dead walk beside us always, not as ghosts to fear, but as spirits to guide." She hesitated, then added, "I speak to Dakota often. Tell him of my day. Ask his forgiveness for not saving him." "It wasn't your fault," Samuel said automatically. "Nor was your family's death yours," she countered gently. "Yet we both carry the weight of it." The simple truth of her observation struck deep. For 3 years, Samuel had carried the guilt of failing to save Eleanor and Lily, allowing it to define him, to drive him from his calling as a healer. But perhaps the greater failure had been in how he'd responded to their deaths, retreating from the world, burying his skills along with his heart. "The sun is setting," Nayeli observed, changing the subject. "We should prepare to move." They gathered their meager supplies, the weapons, the remaining herbs, and most importantly, the map showing Crawford's poisoned water sources. Samuel checked the paper Ezra had given him, confirming the name of the federal marshal they needed to find in Tucson. "Robert Mackenzie," he read aloud. "Ezra's note says he's staying at the Grand Hotel." Nayeli nodded. 3 days' journey if we follow the watershed." They were about to leave their shelter when a sound froze them in place, the unmistakable click of a revolver hammer being cocked. "Not going anywhere, I'm afraid," came Thorne's voice from the gathering shadows. "Except back to meet the judge." The scientist emerged from behind a boulder, his once immaculate suit now torn and blood-stained, his face scratched and bruised from the battle in the canyon. But the revolver in his hand was steady, aimed directly at Samuel's chest. "Quite the day you've had, Dr. Hayes," Thorne continued with unsettling calm. "Impressive, really, but ultimately futile." "Your men?" Samuel asked, playing for time as he assessed their options. "Most dead," Thorne acknowledged with a shrug. "The Apache proved more problematic than anticipated. Crawford retreated to gather reinforcements." "And you followed us," Nayeli observed. "Alone." A cold smile touched Thorne's lips. "I was a field surgeon too, Dr. Hayes, before I found more lucrative applications for my medical knowledge. The Apache may know these mountains, but I know how to track wounded prey." Samuel recognized the predatory focus in Thorne's eyes. The man was dangerous in a way Crawford's hired guns could never be. Not just physically, but intellectually. A man who had perverted healing knowledge to cause deliberate harm. "What happens now?" Samuel asked. "Now we wait for Crawford's return," Thorne replied. "He's quite eager to continue our conversation, particularly regarding your medical expertise." His gaze shifted to Nayeli. "The woman unfortunately remains a complication to be eliminated." Samuel felt Nayeli tense beside him. He placed a restraining hand on her arm, warning against any sudden moves. "You're poisoning innocent people, Thorne," Samuel said, trying to appeal to whatever medical ethics might remain in the man. Children, families. For what money? Progress. Thorne corrected, the same zealotry returning to his eyes. The mineral wealth in these mountains will fuel the next century of American expansion. The telegraph, the railroad, industry. He gestured dismissively with his free hand. A few primitive tribes and stubborn settlers are negligible obstacles compared to the greater good. Samuel studied the man more carefully, noting details he'd missed before. The military bearing, the precise diction, the faint accent beneath the cultured Eastern tones. "You weren't just any field surgeon," Samuel said slowly as realization dawned. "You worked for the War Department, didn't you? Developing chemical weapons." A flicker of surprise crossed Thorne's face before his clinical mask returned. "Very perceptive, Dr. Hayes. Yes, I was part of a special research unit. The war ended before our work could reach its full potential, but the principles—" His eyes took on a distant, almost dreamy quality. "The principles proved adaptable to civilian applications." The revelation sent a chill through Samuel. The man before them wasn't just a hired scientist. He was a weaponeer, someone who had devoted his life to finding more efficient ways to kill. "You're testing your formulations on the Apache," Samuel said, "and on the settlers, using them as laboratory subjects." "Clinical trials," Thorne corrected again. "Different concentrations, different compounds, different delivery methods, all carefully documented." His voice took on a lecturer's tone, as if discussing an academic paper, rather than mass poisoning. "The results have been most instructive." "You're insane," Nayeli whispered. Thorne's expression hardened. "Visionary, madam. There's often little difference to the untrained eye." A distant sound interrupted them, hoofbeats approaching from the south. Thorne's smile widened. "Ah, that would be Crawford, with our reinforcements. Excellent timing." Samuel's mind raced, searching for any advantage, any opportunity. But Thorne maintained his distance, keeping the revolver trained on them with the steady hand of a surgeon accustomed to precision. "Move!" Thorne ordered, gesturing toward the path they'd climbed earlier. "Back to the canyon. Crawford will meet us there." They had taken only a few steps when a new sound cut through the gathering dusk. A low rhythmic chant carried on the evening breeze. Thorne frowned, momentarily distracted, as he glanced toward the source. That split second of divided attention was all Nayeli needed. With a motion too swift for Samuel to follow, she hurled a small stone from her hand. It struck Thorne directly in the eye, causing him to cry out in pain and momentarily lower his weapon. Samuel lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Thorne's midsection. They crashed to the ground together, the revolver discharging harmlessly into the air. Samuel grappled for control of the weapon, his injured arm screaming in protest as Thorne fought with desperate strength. The scientist was stronger than he looked, but Samuel had the advantage of position. He slammed Thorne's gun hand against a rock until the revolver fell from nerveless fingers. Thorne's other hand clawed at Samuel's face, reopening the cuts on his cheek. Suddenly, Nayeli was there, the fallen revolver now in her grip. "Enough," she said firmly. Thorne ceased struggling, his cold eyes calculating even in defeat. "You won't shoot an unarmed man in cold blood," he said to Samuel. "You're a doctor. You took an oath." "I did," Samuel acknowledged, rising slowly to his feet. "An oath to do no harm. An oath you violated when you poisoned those water supplies." The chanting grew louder, closer. Samuel recognized it now as Apache, a war song carried on the wind from multiple directions. Mach and his warriors were approaching. "Your Apache friends won't be pleased to find their cursed woman still alive," Thorne observed with a final attempt at manipulation. "Better to trust me. Crawford can still make you rich." Samuel looked to Nayeli, deferring the decision to her. After all, it was her people approaching, the same people who had condemned her to death days earlier. Nayeli studied Thorn for a long moment, the revolver steady in her hand. Then she looked past him to Samuel, her expression softening slightly. "The spirits will judge him," she said, finally lowering the weapon, "as will the law of your people." The chanting reached its crescendo as figures emerged from the gathering darkness. Apache warriors led by Mock, and surprisingly, Ravenhawk. They surrounded the small group, their expressions guarded, but not openly hostile. Moshk stepped forward, his imposing figure haloed by the last light of sunset. His gaze moved from Samuel to Nayeli, and finally to Thorn. "This is the poison maker," Mock stated, rather than asked, his accented English carrying clearly. "Yes," Samuel confirmed. "He created the sickness that killed your children. That killed Takoda." At the mention of Nayeli's son, something flickered in Mock's stoic expression. A brief glimpse of old grief quickly mastered. He addressed Nayeli directly in Apache, the words flowing too quickly for Samuel to catch more than a few phrases. Nayeli responded in the same language, her voice strong, despite the emotion behind her words. Samuel watched the exchange, understanding little of the specific content, but recognizing the weight of history being addressed between them. Finally, Mock turned back to Samuel. "The woman says you saved her when our people condemned her, that you fight against those who poison our water." "Yes," Samuel said simply. "She also says you are a healer, that you can help those still sick in our camp." Samuel hesitated, the old doubt surfacing. He had sworn never to practice medicine again after failing Eleanor and Lily. But children were dying, innocent lives that his knowledge might save. "I can try," he said finally. "But first we need to reach Tucson. There's a federal marshal there who can stop Crawford permanently." Mock considered this, then nodded once. "We will take you to Tucson. 3 warriors will escort you. The rest of us return to the camp to protect our people." "And him?" Samuel asked, indicating Thorn. A cold smile touched Mock's lips. "The poison maker comes with us, to answer to the mothers whose children he killed." Fear finally broke through Thorn's clinical detachment. "You can't give me to them," he protested to Samuel. "They'll torture me, as barbaric as poisoning children for profit," Nayeli asked quietly. Before Samuel could respond, Ravenhawk stepped forward. The medicine man's usual elaborate adornments were gone, his face painted now with simple lines of mourning. He addressed Mock briefly in Apache, then turned to Samuel. "I was blind," he said in heavily accented English. "Believed white chief's promises. Condemned innocent woman to die." His gaze shifted to Nayeli. "This shame I carry always." He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object wrapped in leather. Carefully, he unwrapped it to reveal a smooth stone disc etched with intricate symbols, one of the speaking stones. "This stone speaks truth," Ravenhawk said, placing it in Nayeli's hands. "Says you bring life, not death. I was wrong." The simple admission clearly cost the proud medicine man greatly. Nayeli accepted the stone with evident emotion, murmuring words in Apache that seemed to ease some of the tension between them. Mock gave orders to his warriors. 2 moved to secure Thorn, binding his hands with rawhide strips. 3 others prepared to accompany Samuel and Nayeli to Tucson. The remainder would return with Mock to the Apache camp. As the warriors dragged Thorn away, the scientist called back, "Crawford won't stop Hayes. He'll bring more men. The silver will be mined, whether you live or die." Samuel watched him go, knowing the warning was probably true. Crawford had too much invested to abandon his plans easily. But now they had evidence, the map, and potentially Thorne himself, if he could be convinced to turn on his employer to save his own skin. Nayeli came to stand beside Samuel, the speaking stone still clutched in her hands. "We should leave now," she said quietly, "while there is still light to see the trail." Samuel nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him lightheaded and weak from his injuries. But there would be time to rest later. Now they had a journey to complete and justice to seek. As they prepared to depart, Mach approached Samuel once more. "When you have finished in Tucson," he said, his expression grave, "our camp needs your healing knowledge. Many still sick, many dying." The request hung in the air between them. Samuel felt the weight of it pressing against his long-held resistance to returning to medicine. But he also felt something else, a certainty that this was the path forward, the way to honor, rather than escape the memory of those he'd lost. "I'll come," he promised, "after we've stopped Crawford." Mach nodded once, satisfied. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Nayeli. In Apache, he said something that made her eyes widen slightly before she composed herself and responded with formal dignity. As the warrior walked away to rejoin his men, Samuel glanced questioningly at Nayeli. "What did he say?" he asked. She met his gaze, something new and unguarded in her expression. "That the spirits are wise to have placed me in your path, and his path was wrong, to have turned away from mine." The simple words carried implications Samuel wasn't yet ready to fully examine. But they planted a seed, the possibility that out of all this death and conflict something new might yet grow, something healing. As the Apache warriors chosen to escort them approached, Samuel took one last look at the canyon where so much had changed in the span of a single day. Crawford was still out there, still a threat. Innocent lives still hung in the balance. But for the first time in 3 years, Samuel Hayes felt the stirrings of purpose returning. Not just survival, but healing. Not just existence, but life. "Ready?" Nayeli asked, standing tall, despite all she had endured. Samuel nodded, adjusting his gun belt and checking that the precious map was secure in his pocket. "Ready." Together, they turned toward the south, toward Tucson, and toward whatever future awaited them beyond this day of reckoning. In the deepening twilight, the high desert seemed to hold its breath. The battle won, but the war against Crawford's greed far from over. 3 days of hard travel lay ahead, and beyond that confrontations yet to come. But in this moment of temporary peace, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Samuel found himself looking not backward at what had been lost, but forward to what might yet be found. "I'll analyze the piece, identify its weaknesses, suggest improvements, and then create a revised 7,000-word version based on my recommendations." The journey to Tucson tortured Samuel Hayes with each step. 3 days of harsh travel across terrain that would have killed them without their Apache guides. His wounds, though wrapped in Nayeli's herbal poultices, throbbed beneath the bandages. The fever came and went, sometimes leaving him shivering despite the desert heat, other times burning through him until sweat soaked his clothes. Yet he pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that Judge Crawford's poison continued to spread through the territory's water, while they struggled southward. The 3 Apache warriors who accompanied them, Kichi, Ahanu, and Tarak, moved like shadows across the landscape, finding water where Samuel saw only dust shelter, where he perceived only exposed rock. Nayeli communicated with them in their shared language, sometimes translating, other times letting the silence speak for itself. As they camped beneath a sandstone overhang, on the second evening, Samuel collapsed near the small fire. The world spun around him, his body seized with violent shivers. "The infection is worse," Nayeli said, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "The poison has entered your blood." Through fever's haze, Samuel understood. The wounds from their escape through the caves had turned septic. Without treatment, blood poisoning would kill him as surely as any bullet. "How far to Tucson?" he rasped. "One more day," she replied, "but you may not have that long." Samuel closed his eyes, medical knowledge warring with diminishing strength. He needed debridement, drainage, antiseptics, things impossible here in the desert. "My medical bag," he said suddenly. "The trunk in my cabin had silver nitrate carbolic acid, proper instruments." "All lost now," Nayeli reminded him gently. "The cavalry outpost between here and Tucson. They'll have a surgeon." Nayeli conferred briefly with the warriors. Tarak immediately gathered his possessions. "Tarak will go ahead," she explained. "Find the soldiers, bring help if possible. If not, he will continue to Tucson for Marshal Mackenzie." Samuel nodded, knowing it was their best option. Even so, his physician's instincts warned him time was short. Blood poisoning moved quickly. "The map," he said, fumbling inside his shirt for the document showing Crawford's poisoned water sources. "And Ezra's letter. Tarak must take them, ensure they reach Mackenzie, even if I don't." "Do not speak of death," Nayeli said sharply, though fear showed in her eyes. She took the documents, speaking rapidly to Tarak. The warrior secured them inside his buckskin shirt, before disappearing into the gathering darkness. As night deepened, Samuel's condition deteriorated. The fever burned hotter, and at times he lost track of where and when he was. In his delirium, he called out for Eleanor and Lily, reaching for the wife and daughter who'd died of influenza 3 years earlier. He relived the horror of their final hours, the ineffectiveness of his medical knowledge, the helplessness as they struggled for each breath, the moment when light faded from their eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured, tears mingling with sweat. "I'm so sorry." Through the haze, he became aware of singing, a low rhythmic chant. Opening his eyes with effort, he saw Nayeli sitting cross-legged beside him, hands moving in subtle gestures over his body without touching him. The warriors sat at a distance, heads bowed in recognition of a sacred ceremony. "What are you doing?" Samuel whispered. "Calling your spirit back from the Shadowlands," she replied softly. "It wanders too close to the path of the dead." "My family," he said, voice breaking. "I see them waiting." Nayeli's expression grew intense. "They would not want you to join them yet, Samuel Hayes. Your work is not finished here." Her cool fingers entwined with his fevered ones. "Many still need you. I need you." Something in her words reached through the fever's grasp, anchoring him to the present. Samuel clung to that anchor as Nayeli resumed her song, her voice carrying him through the dark hours. Dawn brought no sign of Tarak's return. They fashioned a travois and secured Samuel to it, too weak now to ride. The movement caused excruciating pain, but he bit back his cries, knowing they had no choice but to press on. By mid-afternoon, they heard hoofbeats approaching from the south. Kichi and Ahanu moved into defensive positions, rifles ready. Nayeli drew her Remington, standing protectively near Samuel. "If it's Crawford's men," Samuel said weakly, "leave me. Save yourselves." "No." Nayeli's response was fierce. "Together or not at all." The riders appeared on the ridge ahead, 8 men in blue cavalry uniforms with Tarak riding among them. Their leader, a young lieutenant, raised his hand in greeting. "Dr. Hayes, I'm Lieutenant Wilson, Fort Lowell. Your man Tarak found our patrol this morning. He said you're in need of medical attention." "Blood poisoning," Samuel confirmed, his voice barely audible. Wilson nodded, gesturing to a soldier wearing a medic's armband. The man examined Samuel's wounds, his expression growing grave. "This is bad, sir," he said quietly to the lieutenant. "Septicemia's advanced. He needs a real doctor, not field treatment." "Then we ride fast," Wilson decided. He turned to Nayeli. "We'll take him from here. You can accompany us if you wish." Nayeli's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "How do we know we can trust you? The Blue Coats have not always been friends to my people." Lieutenant Wilson sighed. "Ma'am, I give you my word as an officer that no harm will come to you or your companions. Tarak has explained about Judge Crawford, the poisoned water, all of it. We want to help." After a moment's consideration, Nayeli nodded. Samuel was transferred to a stretcher suspended between two cavalry horses. The medic administered morphine, the first proper medication Samuel had received since fleeing his cabin. The blessed relief washed over him, dulling the agony that had been his constant companion for days. They set off at the fastest pace the stretcher arrangement allowed, Nayeli riding close beside Samuel. During one clear moment, he reached for her hand. "If I don't make it," he began. "Do not speak such words," she interrupted. "Listen." Samuel insisted, his grip surprisingly strong. "If I don't make it, you must ensure the truth about Crawford is known. The evidence must reach Mackenzie." "It will," she promised. "But you will tell him yourself. You gave me life when I was buried in the sand," Nayeli said suddenly. "Now I give it back to you. You will not die, Samuel Hayes. I forbid it." There was such fierce determination in her voice that Samuel found himself nodding, a faint smile touching his cracked lips. "Yes, ma'am." Judge Crawford paced the length of his Phoenix Hotel suite, his normally florid face now pale with fury. "Incompetent fools," he spat, throwing the telegram onto the desk. "How hard is it to eliminate one country doctor and an Indian woman?" Victor Thorne watched his employer with clinical detachment. The chemist sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly in his lap. "You underestimated Hayes, a common mistake with quiet men." Crawford whirled on him. "And you assured me your formula would be untraceable. Now the territorial governor himself is investigating reports of poisoned water sources." "The formula works perfectly," Thorne replied coolly. "The problem isn't chemical, it's human. Your men lacked discretion." Crawford resumed pacing. 20 years he'd spent building his empire in the Arizona territory. 20 years acquiring land, water rights, political influence. All threatened because one physician with a conscience couldn't mind his own business. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Crawford decided. "The main reservoir must be contaminated immediately before Hayes reaches Tucson." "That would kill thousands," Thorne observed without emotion. "It would create chaos," Crawford countered. "Perfect cover for our departure. By the time they sort it out, we'll be in Mexico with enough wealth to start again." Thorne nodded thoughtfully. "I have 3 men in position. They can deploy the compound tonight." "Good. Then prepare to travel. We leave at dawn." Crawford moved to the window, looking out at the town that had once felt like the foundation of his kingdom. "Hayes thinks he's won, but he'll die knowing I destroyed everything he tried to save." The sun was setting when they finally crested the last rise and saw Tucson spread before them. Adobe buildings and wooden storefronts turned golden in the evening light. Samuel had slipped into unconsciousness again, his breathing shallow and rapid. They rode directly to Dr. Alfred Turner's office near the center of town. The physician, a lean man in his 50s with spectacles and a trimmed beard, directed the soldiers to bring Samuel inside. "How long has he been like this?" Turner demanded as they transferred Samuel to an examination table. "The fever began 2 days ago." Nayeli answered, refusing to be separated from Samuel despite the doctor's obvious preference to clear the room. "The wounds are from 4 days past." Turner cut away the bandages, his expression darkening as he exposed the angry red flesh streaked with the telltale lines of blood, poisoning extending up Samuel's arm and across his torso. "This man should be dead already," he muttered, reaching for his instruments. "What's kept him alive?" "Apache medicine," Nayeli replied simply, "and his own stubborn spirit." Turner glanced at her sharply, then nodded. "Well, he'll need both those things and more to survive what comes next." He looked to Lieutenant Wilson. "Send someone for Marshal Mackenzie. He'll want to know Dr. Hayes has arrived." As Turner worked to save Samuel's life, debriding necrotic tissue, draining infection, meticulously cleaning the wounds, Marshal Robert Mackenzie arrived. His weathered face was grave as he observed from the doorway. "Will he make it, Doc?" he asked quietly. Turner sighed. "Uncertain. The infection's in his bloodstream. I've done what I can surgically, but now it's a matter of whether his body can fight off what remains." He glanced at Nayeli. "Whatever Apache remedies she's been using likely kept him alive this long. Might be worth continuing them alongside my treatments." Mackenzie nodded, then addressed Nayeli directly. "Miss, I'd like to hear your account of events. I understand you have evidence regarding Judge Crawford's activities." "The map and letter are with Tarak," she replied, not taking her eyes from Samuel's unconscious form. "They show all the poisoned water sources and explain Crawford's plans." Samuel traced them from Crawford's own documents. "I'll find Tarak immediately," Mackenzie assured her. "In the meantime, I've sent riders to Phoenix. Crawford was spotted there yesterday." After the marshal left, Turner completed the final sutures and bandaging. "I've done all I can," he told Nayeli. "The next 24 hours will tell." "It will break," Nayeli stated with quiet certainty. "May I use my medicines alongside yours?" Turner hesitated only briefly. "At this point, it can't hurt. What do you need? Fresh water, clean cloths, a small fire to prepare the herbs I carry." Left alone with Samuel, Nayeli set to work. She unpacked herbs preserved throughout their journey, echinacea, golden seal, and others unique to Apache healing traditions. With practiced hands, she prepared poultices and teas, singing softly as she worked. Through the night, she battled the fever with cool compresses, herbal remedies, and unwavering vigilance. Dr. Turner returned several times, checking vital signs and administering his own medicines. Tincture of willow bark for fever-diluted carbolic acid to combat infection. He watched Nayeli's methods with professional curiosity, but made no comment beyond acknowledging that Samuel seemed to be holding his own against overwhelming odds. Dawn found Nayeli still at her post, exhausted but determined. Samuel's condition remained critical, his breathing shallow, his skin hot to the touch, despite their combined efforts. As morning light filtered through the window, Samuel stirred his eyes, opening briefly. For a moment, they seemed clear and aware, focusing on Nayeli's face. "Eleanor," he whispered. Nayeli's heart constricted at the name of his dead wife, but she kept her voice steady. "No, Samuel. It's Nayeli." Confusion clouded his gaze. "Nayeli," he repeated slowly. Did we stop Crawford?" "Not yet," she replied, offering water. "But soon. Marshal Mackenzie has the map now." Samuel seemed to process this with difficulty. "Good," he managed. His eyes drifted closed again, but his hand sought hers, fingers weakly entwining. "Stay. Always," Nayeli promised, though she wasn't certain he heard. The day passed in continued treatment, brief consultations with Dr. Turner, and occasional visits from Marshal Mackenzie. The map had proven invaluable, allowing authorities to identify all contaminated water sources. Warnings had been dispatched, treatment protocols established. "What about Crawford?" Nayeli asked during one such update. "My deputies are closing in on him in Phoenix," Mackenzie replied. "He won't escape justice." As evening approached, Dr. Turner conducted another examination, his expression grim as he completed his assessment. "The infection's advancing despite our efforts," he told Nayeli candidly. "His heart is weakening." "What else can we do?" Nayeli asked, refusing to accept defeat. Turner sighed, removing his spectacles to rub tired eyes. "Medically, we're doing everything known to modern science, supplemented by your considerable knowledge of herbal remedies. Beyond that," he hesitated, "sometimes we must prepare ourselves for what cannot be changed." Nayeli's spine stiffened. "He will not die." "Miss, I understand your attachment, but—" "No," she interrupted fiercely. "You do not understand. This man pulled me from the earth when my own people buried me alive. He fought against those who poisoned our water when no one else would. He reopened his heart to healing despite his fear of failure." Her voice dropped intense with emotion. "His spirit is stronger than this sickness." Turner studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then remind him. I'll return in the morning." Throughout the night, Nayeli alternated between practical care and constant, gentle reminders of all that remained unfinished. Sometimes she sang healing songs. Other times she simply sat in silence, her hands maintaining that physical connection. Near midnight, the door opened to admit Marshal Mackenzie. His expression was grave. "How is he?" he asked. "Fighting," Nayeli replied. "What brings you here at this hour?" Mackenzie hesitated. "News I thought Dr. Hayes would want to hear. We've captured Thorne. He's talking, trying to save himself by implicating Crawford." "And Crawford?" Nayeli asked. "Escaped our net in Phoenix," Mackenzie admitted. "But there's worse news. According to Thorne, Crawford has dispatched men to contaminate Tucson's main reservoir tonight. If they succeed, hundreds could die within days." "Samuel would know where to look," Nayeli said. "He understands these poisons, how they work." Mackenzie nodded grimly. "That's why I came. But in his condition—" Nayeli made a swift decision. "Bring Thorne here." "What? Let him see what his poisons have done. Perhaps it will persuade him to be more specific about Crawford's plans." Mackenzie considered this. "Irregular, but under the circumstances, I'll have him here within the hour." After he left, Nayeli bent close to Samuel's ear. "Fight harder," she whispered urgently. "Your knowledge is needed now. Many lives depend on you waking." Whether it was her plea, their treatments, or Samuel's will, something changed. His breathing deepened slightly, and his fingers twitched against hers. Encouraged, Nayeli continued speaking to him, reminding him of his promise to help her people. Mackenzie returned with 2 deputies escorting a shackled Thorne. The chemist looked considerably diminished, his elegant suit replaced by prison garb, his refined demeanor shattered. Yet something of his clinical detachment remained as he surveyed Samuel. "Fascinating that he's survived this long," Thorne observed dispassionately. Nayeli controlled her fury. "You poisoned water sources throughout the territory. Children died. Now more will die, unless you tell us exactly where your men plan to contaminate Tucson's reservoir." Thorne's expression revealed nothing. "I've already provided considerable information." "Thorne," Mackenzie stepped forward. "If that reservoir is poisoned and people die, you'll hang. Help us stop this, and I'll testify to your assistance." Calculation crossed Thorne's face. Crawford's plan was typically thorough. 3 men approaching from different directions. The poison will be introduced at the intake points. "What kind of poison?" Nayeli demanded. "Proprietary mixture," Thorne replied with a hint of professional pride. "Primarily arsenic compounds with catalyzing agents, contained in sealed clay vessels that dissolve slowly, releasing toxins gradually. By the time symptoms appear, the source will be impossible to isolate." "Where exactly are these intake points?" Mackenzie pressed. Thorne smiled thinly. "That information might be worth more substantial consideration regarding my sentencing." A weak voice interjected from the bed. "Northern face of the reservoir. 3 stone channels, approximately 200 yards apart." All eyes turned to Samuel, who had opened his eyes and was struggling to focus on them. His voice was barely audible, but his mind was evidently clear. "Hayes," Mackenzie exclaimed. "You're awake!" Samuel ignored him, his gaze fixed on Thorne. "The poison will remain concentrated near the intake points for several hours before fully dispersing. Neutralize with calcium carbonate. Lime. Available at any tannery." Thorne registered surprise, then reluctant professional respect. "Impressive, Doctor. Few would understand the chemical interaction so readily." "Go," Samuel told Mackenzie. "Stop them." The marshal departed immediately to organize the defense of Tucson's water. Left alone with Nayeli, Samuel attempted to sit up but lacked the strength. "Save your strength," she urged. "You have been very ill." "The fever broke?" he asked. Nayeli placed her hand on his forehead, confirming what she had hoped. His skin was cooler, the raging heat diminished. "Yes," she said, joy and exhaustion mingling in her voice. "It broke." Samuel's eyes held hers recognition, and something deeper evident in his gaze. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed," she replied simply. "Where else would I be?" 2 days later, Samuel sat propped up in bed reviewing Mackenzie's report. The marshal had successfully intercepted 2 of Crawford's men at the reservoir. The 3rd had escaped but abandoned his poison barrel in flight. "So Tucson is safe," Samuel concluded, handing the papers back to Mackenzie. "And Crawford," the marshal's expression darkened. "Still at large. My deputies traced him as far as the southern route toward Mexico, but lost his trail near Nogales." "He won't give up so easily," Samuel warned. "Crawford's too proud, too angry to simply flee. He'll want revenge." "Which is why I've assigned deputies to guard this building," Mackenzie replied. "And why I'm suggesting you and Miss Nayeli remain in Tucson under protection until he's captured." Samuel nodded, though the thought of Crawford still free troubled him deeply. He knew the judge a man who'd built his fortune through intimidation, manipulation, and now murder. Such men didn't simply vanish into Mexico when their plans collapsed. They struck back. After Mackenzie left, Dr. Turner conducted his daily examination of Samuel's wounds. The infection had receded significantly, though weakness from the prolonged fever remained. "You're healing remarkably well," Turner observed. "Another week of rest and you should be able to travel, though I'd advise against it." "A week may be too long," Samuel replied. "Crawford is still out there, and there's an Apache camp north of here where many are suffering from his poisons. They need medical attention." Turner frowned. "Hayes, you nearly died. Your body needs time to recover." "Time those people don't have," Samuel countered. "I've seen Thorne's formulations. Standard treatments won't be effective without specific counteragents. And you intend to provide these treatments yourself, in your condition, with help." Samuel glanced toward the door, where Nayeli had gone to prepare more of her herbal remedies. "She knows more about natural medicine than most physicians I've encountered." Between my knowledge of chemistry and hers of healing herbs, we might save many who would otherwise die. Turner studied him thoughtfully. You're a stubborn man, Hayes, but I suppose that's what kept you alive. He sighed. I'll provide whatever supplies I can spare, but I still think it's reckless. Later that evening, as Nayeli changed his bandages, Samuel broached the subject. The Apache camp where your son is. How many are sick from the poisoned water? Pain flashed across her face. Many, perhaps 50 or more. The children suffer worst. Samuel took her hand. We need to go there as soon as I'm strong enough to travel. Surprise, then understanding, filled her eyes. To help them. Yes, with proper treatment, many might be saved. But we have to move quickly. Nayeli studied him carefully. You are still weak, Samuel. Such a journey could undo all your healing. I know, he acknowledged. But I can't stay here safe in Tucson, knowing what's happening in that camp. Not when I have the knowledge that might help. For a long moment, Nayeli was silent. Then, when do we leave? 5 days later, Samuel, Nayeli, and a small escort provided by Mackenzie approached the Apache camp. Located in a sheltered valley between stark mountains, it was larger than Samuel had expected. Perhaps 100 wickiups and skin lodges arranged in rough circles. As they drew near, warriors appeared with rifles ready until they recognized Nayeli. Word spread rapidly, and by the time they reached the central area, a crowd had gathered. Samuel dismounted carefully, still weak, but determined to stand on his own feet. He wore his doctor's coat and carried his medical bag, restocked by Turner before their departure. An imposing figure emerged from the crowd, a warrior in his prime, with a face etched by both battle and wisdom. Nayeli, he acknowledged with a nod, you have returned and brought the white healer. Mach, she replied with a respectful incline of her head. This is Dr. Samuel Hayes. He has knowledge of the poisons that sicken our people. Mach's dark eyes assessed Samuel thoroughly. Many children suffer. Many elders, too. Our medicine man Ravenhawk tries his healing ways, but the sickness grows stronger. Take me to them, Samuel requested. I've brought medicines that may help. The healing lodge was a circular structure larger than the family wickiups. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of bodies, medicinal herbs, and sickness. On reed mats arranged around the perimeter lay the most seriously ill, perhaps 20 people, over half of them children. Samuel's physician's eye immediately catalogued symptoms, the characteristic skin lesions of arsenic-poisoning tremors, suggesting lead toxicity evidence of severe gastrointestinal distress. These people had been systematically poisoned over weeks. He removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. I need clean water boiled, then cooled, and helpers who can follow directions precisely. Nayeli began translating his requirements. From a shadowed corner, an elderly man appeared, elaborately adorned with feathers and bone ornaments that marked him as the tribe's medicine man. I will assist, he said in halting English. My medicine failed these people. Perhaps yours will not. For the next several hours, Samuel worked without pause, moving from patient to patient, administering the chelation agents they'd brought, establishing treatment protocols, and training Nayeli Ravenhawk and several others in the necessary procedures. His medical knowledge, dormant for 3 years, flowed back as if it had never left. Some patients were beyond help, their organs too damaged, their systems too compromised. For these, Samuel could offer only comfort measures, a truth he shared honestly with their families. Others showed hopeful signs of response to the chelation therapy. By midnight, Samuel's strength was failing. The journey and intense medical work had depleted his limited reserves. As he finished examining a young boy who had responded well to the initial treatment, his vision blurred and he swayed on his feet. Nayeli was instantly at his side. "You must rest," she insisted. "You are still healing yourself." "Perhaps a short rest," he conceded. He awoke sometime in the deepest part of the night, disoriented. A small fire burned in the center of the healing lodge, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Around the perimeter, patients dozed or moaned softly. Attendants moved quietly between them. To his surprise, a small figure sat nearby, a young Apache boy, perhaps 7 or 8, watching him with solemn eyes. The child reached out to touch Samuel's arm, where bandages covered his healing wounds. Then he pointed to his own arm, where similar bandages wrapped a smaller limb, evidence of the treatment Samuel had administered earlier. "Yes?" Samuel nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "We are both healing." The boy smiled slightly, then disappeared into the shadows. Moments later, Nayeli emerged carrying a cup of steaming liquid. "Drink this," she said, "for strength." Samuel accepted it gratefully. "How are the patients?" "3 more children show improvement," she reported. "And the elder woman with the worst tremors, they have lessened." "Without you, many would have died tonight," Nayeli said quietly. "Our work has just begun," Samuel countered. "Complete recovery will take weeks of treatment, careful monitoring, rehabilitation for the worst affected." He paused, a realization solidifying. "I can't leave them halfway through the process." Nayeli studied him intently. "Then you will stay until they are healed." "Yes," Samuel decided. "I'll send word to Mackenzie. As long as I'm available when needed, I can conduct my work from here." Something shifted in Nayeli's expression. "And after, when the sick are healed and Crawford faces justice," it was the question that had been hovering between them since Tucson, what came next for each of them and together. "Mackenzie mentioned Tucson needs a physician," Samuel said carefully. "It's not far from here, close enough to serve both communities perhaps." "A bridge between two worlds," Nayeli observed. "I know you have decisions to make about your place here, your future. I wouldn't presume to—" "Samuel," she interrupted gently, taking his hand. "When you found me in the desert, I had been buried alive by my own people. I had lost my son, my position, my purpose." Her dark eyes held his steadily. "You gave me life again, and in our journey I found a new purpose. Whatever path I choose now, I would walk it with you if you wish it." Before he could respond, commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the crack of rifles, screams of alarm. Nayeli was on her feet, instantly reaching for her Remington. Samuel rose more slowly, his body protesting the sudden movement. "Stay with the patients," he told her, drawing his own revolver. "I'll see what's happening." Outside, chaos reigned. Several wickiups at the camp's edge were ablaze, sending columns of fire into the night sky. Warriors raced toward the flames while women gathered children and elders, moving them toward the center of the camp. Samuel spotted Mock directing defenders. "What's happening?" he called. "Raiders," Mock replied grimly. "They came without warning, set fire to the outer lodges." More shots rang out from the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. Samuel took cover behind a supply wagon, trying to assess the situation. The attack made little sense. Raiders typically struck for horses or supplies, not with fire, and from multiple directions at once. Unless this wasn't a typical raid. "Crawford," Samuel muttered, suddenly understanding. The judge had tracked them to the Apache camp and brought his vengeance with him. A figure appeared beside him, Ravenhawk, clutching a rifle almost as old as he was. "The white chief who poisoned our water," the medicine man said. "He comes for you." "And for Nayeli," Samuel added. We need to move the sick away from the fighting. Ravenhawk nodded. The Speaking Stones Caves. Hidden entrance on the mesa's north face. Can you guide everyone there? Samuel asked. Yes, but you must draw the evil one away, or he will follow. Samuel understood the logic. If Crawford was focused on personal revenge, he would pursue Samuel and Nayeli rather than the tribe's sick and vulnerable. I'll find Nayeli, Samuel decided. We'll create a diversion to the south, lead Crawford away from your escape route. Ravenhawk gripped his arm. The ancestors built the caves with secrets. Water flows beneath the stones. Remember this. Before Samuel could ask what he meant, the old man had disappeared back toward the healing lodge. More shots echoed across the camp, closer now. The attackers were advancing under cover of the confusion created by the fires. Samuel made his way back to the lodge, where he found Nayeli already organizing the evacuation of the patients. Crawford, she asked when she saw him. Almost certainly, Samuel confirmed. Ravenhawk is leading the sick to the Speaking Stones caves, but we need to draw Crawford away from them. Understanding flashed in her eyes. A false trail to the south. Exactly. If we're visible enough, he'll follow us instead of the main group. Nayeli nodded, checking her revolver. My son is among those who will go to the caves. I must see him safely there first. Of course, Samuel agreed. I'll prepare horses for our diversion. Meet me behind the large storage lodge in 10 minutes. As Nayeli went to find her son, Samuel moved toward the horse corral. The camp was now in full defensive posture, warriors returning fire against the unseen attackers, while families evacuated toward the northern mesa. Samuel had just secured 2 horses when a bullet splintered the corral post beside his head. He dropped to the ground, scanning the darkness for the shooter. Hayes! A voice called from the shadows. I know it's you, Doctor. Did you think I'd let you destroy everything I've built and simply disappear into Mexico, Crawford? Samuel recognized the once cultured voice, now raw with hatred. Your empire was built on poison and death. Crawford, Samuel called back. It deserves to fall. A laugh, harsh and brittle. Always the moralist. Tell me, how does it feel to have the blood of these savages on your hands? If you hadn't interfered, they'd be dying quietly and alone, not burning in their homes. Samuel edged toward better cover, trying to locate Crawford's position. The territory knows what you've done now. There's nowhere left for you to hide. I don't need to hide, Hayes. I just need to finish what I started. Beginning with you and that Apache woman. Another shot closer this time, kicking up dust at Samuel's feet. Crawford was moving toward him, using the chaos of the attack as cover. Samuel retreated toward the agreed meeting place, with Nayeli leading the horses. Guilt gnawed at him. Crawford's men were attacking the camp because of him, because he'd exposed the judge's crimes. More innocents suffering for his actions. He found Nayeli waiting, her face tight with concern. My son is with the others heading to the caves, she reported. But Crawford's men are following. They've seen the evacuation. Then our diversion needs to be more convincing, Samuel decided. We need to make Crawford believe the evidence against him is with us, not already in Mackenzie's hands. Nayeli understood immediately. So he will pursue us with everything he has. Exactly. Samuel mounted with effort, his still healing body protesting. Ready. Nayeli swung onto her horse with fluid grace. Lead the way, Doctor. They rode out from behind the lodge at a gallop, making no attempt to conceal their departure. As expected, shouts rose from Crawford's men, followed by the thunder of pursuing hoofbeats. Hayes! Crawford's voice bellowed across the night. You can't escape. Samuel and Nayeli rode south away from the escaping Apache. The ruse worked. The sounds of fighting diminished behind them as Crawford's forces redirected their focus to the fleeing pair. For an hour they maintained their lead, pushing the horses as hard as they dared in the darkness. But Samuel's weakness began to tell. The exertion reopened wounds barely healed, and he felt warm blood soaking through his bandages. "Samuel," Nayeli called, seeing him sway in the saddle. "You cannot continue this pace." "Have to," he gasped. "Crawford's still behind us." "Then we stop running and make our stand," she decided. There, she pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. "Defensible position with clear lines of sight." Samuel didn't have the strength to argue. They reached the rocks and dismounted, sending the horses running to maintain the illusion of flight. Nayeli helped Samuel into a sheltered position, then set about creating a defensive perimeter with the few supplies they carried. "How many do you think followed us?" Samuel asked, checking his revolver. "At least 6, including Crawford," she replied. "They will be here within minutes." Samuel leaned back against the cool stone, fighting dizziness. The night ride had cost him dearly. He could feel fever returning as his body struggled with the renewed strain. "Nayeli," he said quietly, "if this goes badly, if Crawford—" "It will not go badly," she interrupted fiercely. "We survived the desert, the caves, your fever. We will survive this too." Before Samuel could respond, the sound of approaching riders reached them. Nayeli took position behind a boulder, her Remington ready. Samuel steadied his breathing, focusing his wavering vision on the path below. Crawford's men approached cautiously, spreading out as they neared the rocks. The judge himself stayed back, letting his hired guns take the risks. "Hayes," Crawford called, "I know you're up there. Save us both some trouble and come out now. Bring the Apache woman and whatever evidence you think you have." Samuel remained silent, conserving his strength. Beside him, Nayeli was equally still, watching the men below with predatory focus. "Have it your way," Crawford continued when no answer came. "But know this. While you're hiding up there, my remaining men are dealing with your Apache friends. That cave won't protect them." Samuel felt a chill. Crawford knew about the cave refuge. Somehow he'd learned of the evacuation plan. "He's bluffing," Nayeli whispered, reading his concern. "He wants us to reveal our position." A shot rang out, bullet ricocheting off rock near Samuel's head. One of Crawford's men had worked his way up the slope, finding a partial angle on their position. Nayeli returned fire immediately, her shot finding its mark. The man cried out, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled back down the incline. The exchange triggered a fusillade from below. Bullets peppered their position, forcing them lower behind the protective rocks. Samuel fired when he could, but his vision blurred with each shot, hands trembling from weakness. "We can't hold them off forever," he said during a lull in the firing. "Sooner or later, they'll outflank us." Nayeli nodded grimly. "We need to split them up, draw them into terrain where their numbers matter less." "The caves," Samuel realized. "If we can reach the speaking stones, we'd have the advantage. Multiple passages, places to hide or ambush. It would mean abandoning our position, exposing ourselves during the retreat," Nayeli cautioned. "We don't have much choice," Samuel replied. "Night's almost gone. Once it's light, we're finished here." After a moment's consideration, Nayeli agreed. "I know a path through the rocks that leads north, eventually connects to the mesa. If we're fast and quiet, we might reach the caves before they realize we've gone." They waited for the next exchange of gunfire, then slipped away from their defensive position, moving silently through the pre-dawn darkness. Nayeli led with Samuel following as best he could, each step an exercise in pain management. They'd covered perhaps half a mile when a shout rose behind them. They're running that way. Abandoning stealth for speed, they pushed forward, climbing steadily toward the mesa that held the Speaking Stone's caves. Samuel's strength was fading rapidly, but determination drove him onward. They needed to reach the caves to warn the Apache about Crawford's knowledge of their sanctuary. The eastern sky had begun to lighten when they finally approached the hidden entrance Ravenhawk had described. Nayeli found it unerringly, a narrow fissure in the rock face, nearly invisible, unless one knew exactly where to look. "Inside," she urged, helping Samuel through the opening. "Quickly!" The passage was tight, but soon opened into a broader tunnel dimly lit by sputtering torches placed at intervals. The sounds of their pursuers grew distant as they penetrated deeper into the cave system. "We need to find Ravenhawk," Samuel said between labored breaths. "Warn him about Crawford." They followed the tunnel as it wound deeper into the mesa, eventually emerging into the vast chamber of the Speaking Stones, the same cathedral-like space they'd passed through during their earlier escape from Crawford's men. The scene before them was both heartening and alarming. The Apache sick had been arranged around the chamber's perimeter, attended by Ravenhawk and other healers. Warriors stood guard at various points, rifles ready. But the atmosphere was tense. They clearly knew danger approached. Mock stepped forward as Samuel and Nayeli entered. "You were to lead them away," he said, accusation in his voice. "Crawford knows about the caves," Samuel explained. "He has men coming here directly. We came to warn you." Ravenhawk joined them, his ancient face grave. The White Chief and his warriors approached the south entrance. "Soon they will find their way here." "How many entrances to this chamber?" Samuel asked. "3 that men can use," Ravenhawk replied. "Southeast, and the way you came from the north. There are other passages too small for adults." Samuel assessed their situation quickly. With the sick and injured, evacuation was impossible. They would have to defend the chamber or find another way to neutralize Crawford's threat. "Ravenhawk," he said suddenly, "earlier you mentioned water beneath the stones. What did you mean?" The old medicine man's eyes gleamed with understanding. "The ancestors built this place with wisdom. The Speaking Stones stand above an underground river. In ancient times, when enemies came, the river could be released." "A flood," Samuel realized. "You can flood the lower passages." "Yes," Ravenhawk confirmed. "Great stones hold back the water. When moved, the river reclaims its path through the earth." "Where does the water go?" Samuel asked. "It follows channels carved long ago, emerging downslope from the mesa. The main chamber remains dry if all are above the marked line." He pointed to a dark stain circling the chamber walls about 4 feet above the floor. "And how quickly does the water rise?" "Like a storm breaking," Ravenhawk said. "Moments only." Samuel exchanged a glance with Nayeli, a plan forming between them. "If we could lure Crawford and his men into the lower passages, then release the water, they would be swept away," she finished. "But how do we ensure they're in the right place, at the right time?" "Bait," Samuel said simply. "I'll let Crawford see me in the south passage, draw him and his men in deep enough that they can't escape the flood." "No," Nayeli protested immediately. "You're too weak. I will do it." "It has to be me," Samuel insisted. "Crawford wants me most of all. He knows I'm the primary witness against him. You're needed here to help Ravenhawk protect the sick if our plan fails." Before she could argue further, the sound of distant voices echoed through the passages. Crawford's men had found one of the entrances and were making their way toward the main chamber. "No time to debate," Samuel said, checking his revolver. "Ravenhawk, show me where these water stones are. Nayeli, help Mock move everyone above the flood line." Ravenhawk led Samuel to a small side chamber off the main cavern. There, in a pool of unnaturally still water, a careful arrangement of massive stones created a dam of sorts, holding back what Samuel could now see was a substantial underground stream. "Remove these center stones," Ravenhawk instructed. "The water does the rest." Samuel studied the mechanism, impressed by the ancient engineering. "How many men needed?" "4 strong warriors," Ravenhawk replied. "But once begun, all must reach higher ground immediately. The water comes fast and without mercy." Back in the main chamber, Nayeli and Mach had organized the evacuation of patients to elevated platforms and ledges along the walls. Warriors took defensive positions covering each entrance, ready to buy time if needed. "They're in the South Passage," Mach reported, moving cautiously but coming steadily. Samuel took Nayeli aside. "I'll draw them deep into the passage, make them think I'm fleeing. Once they're fully committed, give Ravenhawk the signal to release the water." "Samuel," she gripped his arm, "your strength is already failing. If you fall before reaching safety—" "I won't," he promised, though they both knew it might be a lie. "Trust me, Nayeli, as I've trusted you since the desert." Her eyes held his for a long moment before she nodded. "Go then. But return to me Samuel Hayes. That is not a request." Samuel smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "Yes, ma'am." He moved toward the South Passage, revolver in hand. The voices of Crawford's men grew louder. They were perhaps 100 yards into the tunnel system, now moving slowly, wary of ambush. Taking a deep breath, Samuel stepped into the passageway. About 50 yards in, he fired a shot into the ceiling, the sound reverberating through the tunnel. "Crawford," he called. "Still hunting me? Come and get me then." A moment of silence. Then, "Hayes, surrender, now, and I'll make it quick." "Like you did for Ezra Johnson," Samuel called back. "Or the Apache children your poison killed, I think not judge." He fired again, then retreated deeper into the passage, moving back toward the main chamber, but staying visible enough to draw Crawford's pursuit. The judge's men surged forward, emboldened by discovering their quarry. Samuel continued his fighting withdrawal, conserving ammunition, but ensuring Crawford committed fully to the chase. When he reached the final bend before the main chamber, Samuel paused. Crawford and 5 men were now deep in the passage, perhaps 70 yards from the chamber entrance. Far enough in that the flood would catch them close enough that Samuel might still reach safety. "End of the road, Hayes," Crawford called, catching sight of him. The judge was thinner than when Samuel had last seen him, his once immaculate clothing now trail-worn, his face haggard with exhaustion and hate. "No more running." "I'm done running," Samuel agreed, stepping into clear view. "It's time you answered for what you've done." Crawford laughed, a brittle sound. "And who's going to make me?" "You half-dead country doctor and a tribe of dying Indians." He raised his pistol. "I think not." "Not me," Samuel said quietly. "The water." Confusion crossed Crawford's face. "What water?" Samuel fired his last shot, not at Crawford, but at the ceiling above him, then turned and sprinted for the main chamber. Behind him, Crawford's curse was followed by multiple gunshots, bullets whining past him as he ran. He burst into the main chamber, bellowing, "Now!" to Ravenhawk, then scrambling for the nearest elevated position. Nayeli was there, helping him climb to safety, as warriors pulled the keystones from the water barrier. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A roar like thunder filled the cave system as the underground river, restrained for generations, reclaimed its ancient path. Water surged through the lower passages with unstoppable force, converging on the main chamber. Crawford and his men still in the South Passage had no warning and no escape. Their screams were briefly audible above the water's roar, then swallowed by the flood, as it swept through the tunnels and into the main chamber. The water rose rapidly, reaching the marked line on the walls before finding its exit channels. Samuel watched in awe as the flood coursed through the chamber, then drained away through passages on the opposite side, leaving a transformed landscape of glistening stone and scattered debris. Of Crawford and his men, there was no sign. The river had taken them, carrying their bodies deep into the earth or out into the desert below. "It is finished," Ravenhawk said quietly. "The ancestors have passed judgment." Samuel turned to Nayeli, who still supported him on the ledge. "Your son! Safe," she assured him, gesturing to where a young boy sat with other children on a higher platform. "All our people are safe." Exhaustion finally claimed Samuel. The wounds reopened during their flight, the exertion of the chase, the emotional drain of the final confrontation, all combined to overcome even his formidable will. He slumped against Nayeli, consciousness fading. "Rest now," her voice followed him into darkness. "It's over." Samuel awoke to sunlight filtering through a small opening overhead. He lay on a comfortable pallet in a side chamber of the cave system, bandages fresh on his wounds. The cool scent of healing herbs in the air. "Welcome back," Nayeli said from beside him. "You have slept for 2 days." Samuel tried to sit up, wincing as his body protested. "Crawford." "Gone," she confirmed. "When the water receded, we found nothing. The river carried him and his men away." "And the sick? Improving," she said with a smile. "Your treatments work. Even Ravenhawk admits this." Samuel relaxed back onto the pallet, processing all that had happened. Crawford was gone, his threat ended. The poisoned water sources were identified, treatments established. The Apache sick were responding to care. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Marshal Mackenzie arrived yesterday," Nayeli replied. "He seeks your testimony against Thorne once you are well enough to travel. And after that, she said, taking his hand, "we build that bridge between two worlds you spoke of. Tucson needs a physician, one who respects both Western medicine and Apache healing ways." "We?" Samuel asked, hope rising in his chest. "Yes, Samuel Hayes, we." She smiled, a rare and beautiful sight. "Where else would I be but by your side?" Samuel returned her smile, feeling a peace he hadn't known since Eleanor and Lily died. He had lost one family, but perhaps found another. Not replacing what was gone, but building something new from the ashes of grief. Outside, the desert sun continued its ancient journey across the sky, illuminating a landscape washed clean by the underground river. Within the caves, patients healed under the combined care of Western medicine and Apache tradition. And in a small side chamber, Samuel Hayes and Nayeli began to plan a future neither could have imagined when she lay buried in the sand, and he wandered, lost in grief. A future of healing, not only for others but for themselves.